Hi, welcome back guys. This is your friend, the D in What If, with another fanfiction. This is the third part of What If Deku were dead and he reincarnated into a cat. All credits for this video go to their respective authors. So please support the real author. Check out the link in the description for more details. Please give this video a like and subscribe to the channel if you want more videos like this. Now let's get into the fanfic. So, Katsuki, how was your first day of school? Mitsuki asked while the family sat at the dinner table. Katsuki's eyes went from his mother to his father, and then to his auntie Inko. Auntie Inko's eyes were red-ringed, but no tears were to be seen. She was good at hiding her tears until the dark of the night. More times than not, Katsuki would hear his auntie trying to muffle her heartbreaking sobs with her pillow in the dead of night when she thinks everyone is in bed. Katsuki. His mother's voice became sharp at his lack of an answer, and it was that sharp tone that brought him back. It was fine, hag, he grumbled while eating his natto and rice. And your class? Fine, he continued with his lack of a committed response. It must be cool being with a bunch of other kids at your level, his father, Masaru, said, and it made Katsuki snort in response. My level? I'm above. He paused as his face flashed into his mind, when he accidentally looked at Inko's eyes, and he swallowed hard before he looked at his natto. Yeah, he grumbled and then ate some of his food. Some are interesting. He stamped out of fiery temper. One kid likes to dress in girls' clothing and has this cat. That damn cat. Katsuki can't shake that cat. The cat that hissed at him the moment he raised from his seat. The same cat that hissed at him when Loud Cloud asked if he wanted to pet him. The cat with those stupidly green eyes and green fur. The cat that reminded Katsuki of him. It's not fair. A childish and angry part of his mind popped up in the very back of his mind like an echo. It's not fucking fair. It wasn't supposed to be like this. I never wanted him to actually. It almost made Katsuki want to cry. He wears clothes for girls, meaning he's wearing a skirt, Mitsuki asked, and Katsuki nodded, not trusting his voice. It's your fault he's gone. You know that. It's your fault. You told him to take a swa. I'm done. Katsuki stood abruptly and grabbed his bowl. You hardly touched your food. Inko spoke softly for the first time since sitting down, and Katsuki stopped. He couldn't look at her. He turned his head purposely away from her. She'll hate you forever once she finds out. And you deserve it. What kind of hero are you? You told her quirkless son to take a swan. I'm not hungry. He clutched the bowl tighter in his hand while trying to keep his composure. I'll wrap it up and eat it later. He then walked into the kitchen, letting the door softly shut behind him. He grabbed the cling wrap and quietly wrapped his remaining food up before shoving it into the fridge. He would then retreat to his room for the rest of the night. He didn't want to talk to anyone. He just wanted to be left alone and do his homework for the night. He would do that and would re-emerge from his little sanctuary in the dead of the night, nearly at midnight. He couldn't sleep and decided to finish up his forgotten dinner. Well, he was surprised to see his auntie standing in the kitchen. It was surprising because the kitchen was dark, and not a single light was on. The only reason he saw her was because of the stove. She had a kettle heating up, and the light from the flame on the stove was illuminating her. She was just staring at the kettle, the light from the fire bouncing off of her glassy eyes. Katsuki wanted to sneak past her to get to his food. He grabbed the food from the fridge and silently shut it. It was on his way out did Inko speak softly to him. What did I do to deserve this? First, my husband leaves, and now I lost my son. Her breath shuddered. I know it's almost been a year, but... He paused and turned to look at her. She was looking at him and quickly wiped her eyes. Oh, Katsuki, she whispered before sniffling. Forgive me, I saw your hair and thought you were Mitsuki. She swallowed her tears down and inhaled deeply. I didn't mean to burden you. She turned away from him to look back at her kettle. Katsuki looked at the food in his hand and then put it on the countertop. Look, I know I'm not the best when it comes to things like comfort. But if you need to talk, I'm all ears. Inko looked at him and then looked back at the kettle on the stovetop. He was your friend too, and I shouldn't bother you about this. He wouldn't want that. Izuku would have, she whispered lowly, and he almost couldn't hear her. She brought her hands back up to wipe her tears. Izuku would have wanted you on the top of your game now that you're in UA. He would have been your biggest supporter. Her mouth twisted in her reflection on the kettle. She slapped her hand over her mouth and a high-pitched whine left her mouth. Katsuki reacted on instinct as he wrapped his arms around her. Inko immediately started to weep heavily on his shoulder. I miss him so much, she cried, her voice muffled against his shoulder. At that moment, Katsuki hated Izuku. He hated Izuku for being so selfish that he didn't think about his mother when he took a swan dive off the roof of a building, like Katsuki told him to do. Yeah, Katsuki hated Izuku, but it was hard for him not to hate himself even more. He wasn't supposed to jump. He was just supposed to give up, to see that his dream was unobtainable. Hey, Katsuki bit his lip so hard that he tasted blood only seconds later. I have to be better. This was something he told himself. Izuku's death woke something up in Katsuki, something that practically slapped him across the face. Do better. Be better. Because you're going to be a shit hero otherwise. So, he was going to be better. He didn't know how, and he knew it wasn't going to be easy but had to be. For Izuku. Izuku wasn't jealous. He was not. I will admit, Pumpkin has been a lot calmer since Eri shrunk him down. Hisashi stated as Pumpkin rubbed himself neatly against Hitoshi. The orange cat rubbed his face against Hitoshi's neck and purred loudly. Hitoshi laughed and patted Pumpkin, trying to bring the cat down. But Pumpkin wasn't having it and kept trying to rub against him. Izuku's eyes narrowed as he just stared from his spot on the floor. Pumpkin, what are you doing? Izuku finally asked. Pumpkin turned, looked at Izuku, and had the gall to look smug. Well, he's not just your human, is he? Izuku's eye twitched. Excuse me. You heard me. You go around acting like he's all yours, but he's not. I bet it's just eating you up inside that I dare do this, isn't it? There he is. I knew he was still in there deep inside, Izuku thought as he started to pace. Pumpkin twisted under Hitoshi's chin, causing the boy to grab him and turn Pumpkin so he was now being cradled in Hitoshi's arms. Pumpkin placed his paw on Hitoshi's nose as Hitoshi held him. He's calmed down, that's for sure. Hitoshi agreed with Hisashi on that. What do you have to say about that, Mom? I am not your mother, because a mother wouldn't do what I'm about to do. Pumpkin chuckled. And what would that be? I don't have to try. Izuku simply hopped up to the arm of the couch in one clean jump. He leaned against Hitoshi's arm. As predicted, Hitoshi gently placed Pumpkin on the ground. Hey there, Mossy. How was your nap, buddy? Hitoshi asked as he picked Izuku up to hold him like one would hold a toddler. Izuku was deliberate in making himself look as cute as possible, with big eyes and flicking ears, the works. It made Hitoshi smile and gently scratch under Izuku's chin. Izuku then looked down at Pumpkin once Hitoshi was done. He's mine, Izuku whispered, unaware of the can of worms he just opened. Very well, mother, if that's the game you want to play. I'll play, Pumpkin vowed before stalking off. I'm not your mother. Izuku shook his head. 2 female cats in this house and he still sees me as his mother. Well, Pumpkin wasn't joking. His first plan happened that very night. Izuku was asleep in his own bed but was awoken when Hitoshi's bedroom door opened. Opening his eyes, Izuku watched as Pumpkin came strolling in like he owned the place. The orange cat jumped with ease onto Hitoshi's bed. Izuku felt his ears flick as he watched as Pumpkin made himself comfortable right next to Hitoshi's sleeping form, making himself into a loaf right next to Hitoshi's head, directly on Hitoshi's pillow. Whatever, Izuku thought, and he lowered his head black down. As long as Pumpkin wasn't attacking Hitoshi out of malicious. That's what Izuku was telling himself away. He tossed and turned in his bed for a small while before he eventually couldn't take it anymore. Izuku wasn't going to do anything rash. No, he wasn't jealous. He just wanted to be with Hitoshi for tonight. So, he jumped up onto the bed, ignored Pumpkin, and got on the other side of Hitoshi, actually wiggling under Hitoshi's arm to make himself comfortable. Yeah, that's all he needed. Hitoshi would wake up in the morning confused as to why he had 2 cats in his bed, but in the end, wouldn't think about it too much, unaware of the war that was now brewing between Izuku and Pumpkin, the war for his affection. During battle training, Izuku was sent to Nezu's office because when Toshinori was asked, in class, if he was going to include Moss in the class, he said it was asinine and he wasn't going to waste time involving a cat in a class meant for heroes. That's fine. Izuku had had the last laugh when he grabbed onto All Might's cape and refused to let him go, to the point that they actually had to get Hitoshi and Shouta involved, Izuku dangling from the end of Toshinori's cape like a decoration. It made the class laugh, even more so when, you guessed it, the cape tore. Izuku did not spit this bit of fabric back at Toshinori. No, he was going to keep it as a memento. The time he tore one of David Shield's specially made outfits. So, now here Izuku was, griping about Pumpkin. And then, when I asked Pumpkin why don't you go for someone else in the house, he has the gall to look me dead in the eyes and say, because the others aren't yours. Can you believe it? Izuku ranted to Nezu. It made the rat chuckle. Izuku dipped his paw into his decaffeinated green tea and drank from the fat droplet. Due to your intelligence, I tend to forget certain things about you, Izuku, Nezu said as he pushed a butter cookie toward Izuku, who started to eat it. Like what? Izuku inquired once he swallowed his first bite of cookie down. That you're still a cat. It's very common for cats, and rats for that matter, to not like sharing what's theirs, if you get my meaning. Well, cats, dogs, rats, you get my gist. What you need to remember is that you are intelligent. You aren't like most cats. Yes, Hitoshi is yours technically. It's clear to everyone that you two are almost made for one another. However, you need to remember that he's also his own person and that he doesn't belong to you, Izuku. He's allowed to receive affection from the other cats in the household. Let's be honest, it's not even the affection thing. It's because it's Pumpkin. Izuku's ears twitched and he looked down at his reflection in the water. And this might even hit a sore spot. And I do apologize, but it might not even be fully because of Pumpkin. From what you told me about your past life, Hitoshi is the first boy your age to show you love, care, and affection. So, it's only natural that you'd want to cling tightly to him and not let anyone else share the spotlight in his eyes. Let Pumpkin show the boy some love, for your own good and mental health, Nezu told him before he took a long sip of his drink. I guess you're right. I should lessen the hold on my reins, so to speak, before I accidentally give myself abandonment issues. That's a good boy. Nezu scratched Izuku up top the head. Now, is there anything else? Izuku thought about it, then he nodded. I've been having some weird dreams. Nezu slyly slid a test paper under Izuku's paws, followed by an ink pad right next to him. Talk and answer, dear, he urged the cat. Fair enough. It was multiple choices. So, Izuku pressed his paw into the ink pad and started to talk while answering the honestly easy questions. I've been having weird dreams. They aren't bad, not even nightmares, just weird, he explained as he went down the paper, pressing perfect little kitten paw prints onto each correct answer. Do you want to explain them? I would ... if I could understand them. I see two figures. They're hard to see, but I know they're figures. They're blurry and they're talking, but it's too hard to hear them. It's like my ears are clogged. One of the figures is reaching to me, trying to touch me, but he can't. It's like I'm just out of reach. Done. Izuku pushed the paper back to Nezu. Nezu took the paper and read over the answers. How interesting. Now, the dream could be anything. I'm sure it's nothing you really should concern yourself with. Now, what I'm interested in is this. Nezu turned the paper for Izuku to see. You got all of these answers right. These were all test questions from things you should have learned in Aldera Middle School. In fact, I took this from a test you already took. Every single one of them you answered correctly. However, here Nezu turned his computer monitor to face Izuku. You only scored a 75. Care to explain? Izuku stared at the paper and then at the screen. Look, Aldera sucked. I already told you this. Not only did they favor Kaken, but the teachers were just awful. One teacher constantly made the center of attention in class, thus making everyone remember, hey, the quirkless kid exists, and they would beat on me. And when I say center of attention, I don't mean in a good way either. In fact, the day I jumped, he told the class how I applied to UA. God, that was fun. Nezu's ears perked and brought his monitor back around. He then started to rapidly type. As for your question, my teachers thought I was cheating if I scored higher than an 80. So, I purposely got C's in class. That's why my grade average shit. Well, was shit. He muttered the last part and felt his shoulders slump and his ears lower. I guess it didn't help that if a teacher let me slide with an A, or God forbid a higher score than Kaken would corner me and call me a cheater. So, I just stopped trying near the end. I stopped doing homework and only did classwork, because it doesn't matter how hard I studied. I would just be called a cheater. I see. Nezu's teeth suddenly chittered and there became a rather scary aurora around the chimera. It made Izuku's skin rise up in alarm. Yes, I see. Are you aware of the smear campaign your old teachers tried on you? What? Izuku's ears perked and Nezu turned the screen around so he could see. I needed to see your application for myself, and I did find it, but not before realizing why I never noticed it before. You see, I would have known if a quirkless child tried to sign up for the entrance exam, but it never crossed my radar. Well, it turns out that your homeroom middle school teacher immediately blackboxed you. Blackboxed? Izuku whispered while he looked at the application on the computer. Blackboxing is simple. He put you under do not recommend, and when asked why he had this to say, Nezu pulled up another box on the screen and there a 5-paragraph essay on all of Izuku's faults showed up. To sum it up, he called you disruptive and easily jealous of those with quirks. He said you wouldn't get along with Bakugo Katsuki, and constantly got into fistfights with the others in the class. That's a lie. Izuku roared in indignation while looking at the monitor. His fur rose and he became a puffball in his ire. I would say so. Nezu turned the monitor back. However, and please don't take this to offense, I only have one side of the story, now don't I? Nezu inquired and he picked up his phone off the cradle. I think it's high time this school got a proper investigation. An investigation? Izuku whispered. Well, if what the things you are saying are completely true, then this school is not complying with the law at all. There are reasons why we don't want students using their quirks outside of a professional setting. And not only that, it's a clear abuse of power. Hello, Aburo. Are you doing anything? Nezu chirped. There was a second of silence before he continued. Great. Come to my office, please. Bring Shouta with you. Tell him it involves Izuku Midoriya. Thank you. Izuku's ears perked. Why does Eraserhead care about me? Izuku asked as his confusion grew. I mean, you went to great lengths to keep my actual name a secret from him. Okay, maybe not great lengths, but the point stands. Nezu hung up the phone and looked at Izuku. I'm going to admit something to you. Something that may upset you, maybe even make you angry. Nezu stood up and stared out his window looking at the grounds of UA. He put his paws behind his back and then cast a gaze at Izuku. The day you jumped, you were nearly saved. Nearly. Izuku stared at Nezu with wide eyes. What? He whispered. Yes. You see, young Izuku, Eraserhead was the one to try and come to your aid. He saw you on that building that afternoon. Izuku shook his head. Eraserhead only works at night. Not that day. He took the day shift because he and his husbands had plans that night. He saw you and he tried to save you, but, well, we know how it ended. Nezu looked back out the window. Izuku didn't know how to feel as he breathed in and out heavily. His chest felt heavy with each breath in and out. That's why I didn't tell Shouta your real name that day. I just couldn't put him through that hurt again. Not only that, he may even see it as a sadistic prank. I still won't tell him. I'll leave that to you if you wish to. This way he doesn't see it as anything sadistic on my end. But, now that I have some proof of Aldera's alleged misdeeds, I think it's time for some actions to be taken against them. The door to the office opened and Inaburo and Shouta came. Both men took seats at Nezu's desk. Their faces were both serious. The most serious Izuku has ever seen, in fact, especially for Aburo. Boss, you may go. We have much to discuss and I'm sure the foundational hero study class should be ending shortly. Nezu dismissed Izuku with a wave. Izuku's heart felt heavy. There was no other way to describe it. Still, he jumped down from Nezu's desk and made his way out of his office. The door shut behind him and Izuku looked back at the door. Still, he perked himself back up and rushed to where Toshinori was holding foundational hero studies. The door was not a push open, so he had to scratch on it a few times before someone heard. Welcome back, Masi. Momo picked him up with a whisper of her voice. You're just in time. Hitoshi just finished his battle against Mainta and Ajiro. He was paired with Ochako and they were heroes. She filled him in while scratching under his chin. He and Ochako won. Bro. Denki was the first to officially greet Hitoshi and Ochako when they stepped through that door. Hitoshi was finally wearing his hero costume. His costume was similar to Eraserhead's own costume in that it was a jumpsuit and he even had a utility belt around his middle used for holding medical supplies for those that may need it. However, his wasn't completely black, but more of a deep purple. The suit was arguably tighter on Hitoshi than Eraserhead's, as Hitoshi wanted to minimize any sounds the fabric may make. His capture scarf was wrapped around his neck and he wore black combat boots. Hidden inside one of those boots was a mini baton for self-defense, of course, and judging by the welts on Mainta's face, it was put to use. Hitoshi took a step back in surprise when Denki stepped up to him. Your quirk. It's so Opus. How are we supposed to compete with that? Denki demanded with a laugh. It's what? Hitoshi asked in alarm. Opus, you know, overpowered. It's a strong quirk, my guy. Denki complimented. Ida joined in next. He was looking a little banged up, telling Moss that his fight had been an intense one. I have to agree, and judging by the fact that we didn't even know you had it only gave you a big advantage. It's a useful quirk for sure. Useful. Hitoshi breathed out. He then smiled and scratched his face. Thank you. I was honestly afraid of how you guys would take it, which is why I kept it a secret for so long, he admitted. Izuku slid out of Momo's arms and came up to Hitoshi. Hey, Mossy. He picked his cat up. We had the fastest win time. He grinned at his cat. That we did. Ochako poked Hitoshi's cheek. Couldn't have done it without you and that useful quirk. You're making me blush. Hitoshi laughed a little. It wasn't much. All I had to do was put Ajiro under and had Ochako go after the bomb while I fought with Mainta, which ... wasn't hard. That's only because you pulled out that baton. Something like that should be illegal. Mainta yelled while pointing at Hitoshi. It's not. Toshinori quickly diffused the situation. The baton would have been illegal if it were made like an actual baton, which are heavy to cause blunt damage. Can I? Toshinori asked, and Hitoshi leaned down and whipped the baton out of his boot. He tossed it to his teacher. Toshinori made a quick movement to bring the baton to its full length. He then flicked it. The baton was hollow. This hollow, it's enough to hurt, to sting even, but not enough to cause horrible blunt damage like a normal baton. Trust me, his parents did their research on what's allowed and what's not. Mainta huffed a little, but let it drop. Don't be jealous because you got beat. Izuku hissed out and Mainta's eyes narrowed. You know, for a service animal, he's not exactly calm, and isn't that a thing for service animals? I mean, he tore into All Might's cape because All Might wouldn't let him join. He hissed at me and Bakugo more times than I can count. Are you sure he's properly trained, or are you just trying to sneak your cat into school? Trust me, buddy, he's trained. Hitoshi defended Izuku. He's just not like other cats. He has a mind of his own. Mainta's eyes rolled and he shook his head. A cat's a cat. Yeah, this one may seem smarter, but at the end of the day, he's still a cat. So don't go claiming he's something he's not. You're just mad you lost this cat yesterday. Izuku narrowed his eyes right back at Mainta. See, it's not like he's actually saying something. Denki shook his head with a smile. Bruh, just say you're jealous of a cat and move on. A couple of others laughed, but a small voice spoke, one that made everyone turn in alarm. He said you're just mad you lost to Chemney yesterday. Everyone turned towards the voice in alarm. There, in the far corner of the room, hiding behind his hands, stood Kota, the boy that was so quiet that people often forgot he was there. The boy that didn't utter a single word to anybody until right now. Even Toshinori was looking at him in alarm. "You can understand me?" Izuku asked from Hitoshi's arms. Kota nodded. Life work allows me to talk to animals. He continued to whisper in a voice so small that he was almost inaudible. He lowered his hands, his face red while he touched his index fingers together nervously. "I've been wanting to have a conversation in WTHU, but I was too shy to ask your owner." Kota swallowed hard before saying something a little more daring. Also, you said some nasty THNGS to all MGHT today. I THNK you should apologize." "No." Kota turned away just as quickly. "Okay." Toshinori blinked. "Well," Kota just shook his head. He said no. "Fair enough, I suppose." Toshinori then stood. "Well, then, Moss wouldn't mind if I asked this then." "What did he say?" Kota turned scarlet and covered his face with his hands. He then rapidly shook his head back and forth. His refusal was clear as day. Hitoshi started to chuckle. It was just a soft chuckle as he put Moss on his shoulder. "What am I going to do with you, Moss?" he asked, and Izuku gave a purr as he sat. "Then, allow me to ask this, Moss, since we have a translator. Why do you hate me so much?" Toshinori asked as he stepped up to the cat. "I did nothing to you." "Nothing?" Izuku challenged with a growl erupting from his throat. "Nothing. I guess to Moss you haven't." But to Izuku he stopped himself. "Forget it. You don't deserve to know the damage you've caused." Izuku turned his head up and away from Toshinori. Kota, clearly not wanting to be the center of attention any longer, jogged up to Toshinori and whispered something into his ear. "I don't know an Izuku." Toshinori shook his head. Bakugo tensed. Izuku tensed. The room became silent as eyes were on Moss. Izuku felt anger, white-hot anger. He turned to face Toshinori. "Liar," he roared. He roared so loudly that his voice hurt. "MOTHERFUCKING liar." Moss Hitoshi breathed out, almost looking afraid as Izuku just screamed. "Jesus Christ." Denki and the others quickly covered their ears at Moss's wailing. Even Hitoshi had to cover his ears as it sounded like Moss was being tortured. Toshinori took a startled step back and looked genuinely afraid at this outburst. "Izuku's dead because of you. You crushed his dreams and you have the balls to look me in the eyes and claim you don't know. Do yourself a favor and retire. Clearly, Alzheimer's is setting in early." Then Izuku jumped from Hitoshi's shoulder and was gone. He walked up to the door, jumped onto the handle, and used his own weight to let himself out. "Moss." He heard Hitoshi call for him, but he didn't turn back. No. Izuku found himself back in the classroom, where he would find Shouta inside of his sleeping bag. Eraserhead looked at him and raised an eyebrow. "What are you doing?" He stopped when Izuku wiggled himself through the tiny face hole Shouta had made for himself. "Akave." Shouta breathed out in surprise, even doubly so when Izuku just pressed himself against the man's chest. "This is rare." Izuku's chest hitched and he realized he was crying. Slow tears trailed down his face as he whined. Hey, why are you crying?" Shouta inquired and wiggled into the sleeping bag with Izuku zipping it the rest of the way up to give them both privacy. There. He then pulled Izuku into his chest. "I'm here," he whispered and wrapped his arms around Izuku. "I am here," Shouta whispered again while he rocked Izuku just a little. "It's okay." Izuku just couldn't help it as he envisioned a different ending to his life that day. One where Shouta saved him. Would he hold him like this? To a sobbing Izuku clutching onto his jumpsuit for dear life. He hoped so. He reached his paw up and gently extended his claws out to grab onto Shouta's jumpsuit. God, did he hope so? Izuku laid in his bed and had his head resting on his paws. He just stared blankly at the wall in front of him. He could hear Hitoshi and the others talking while eating at the table. Izuku's advanced hearing allowed him to hear everything. "You heard him talk?" Oboro had asked. "Yeah, me and the entirety of Class 1A. Hitoshi grumbled. It was almost scary. I've never seen him act like this. "What did he say exactly? What was the context?" Shouta inquired. Izuku sucked in a breath and sighed. "We found out that Kota could understand him and All Might just wanted to know why Moss hated him," Hitoshi explained. "I don't know what Moss said because Kota whispered it into All Might's ear. All Might just said that he didn't know." Sorry, Hitoshi whispered weakly. "I can't remember all that was said because Moss just exploded in anger and I'm telling you all of you he called All Might a liar. He screamed and excuse my language, but he then added it up by calling him a motherfucking liar. We all heard it." "Hey, language," Hazashi gently scolded before moving on. "Regardless, Oboro, did you say you heard him talk once?" "Yeah, I did. I thought he screamed no, but I figured it was all in my head." Shouta hummed. "Did he say anything else, Hitoshi?" "No, he just started screaming. I mean, legit screaming. Not yelling, not caterwauling, but screaming. It was so loud that we all covered our ears. Then he left. I just can't believe he ran to you. Then again, I'm not that surprised." "I am," Oboro yelled in indignation. "I was right down the hallway. Shouta chuckled. You've had your moments with him. Now it's someone else's turn. Regardless, now that I have some context, I am concerned now. We may need to set a peace meeting of sorts up with Nezu as a mediator between All Might and Spicy. The door opened slowly and a gray and white cat poked their head in. Is everything okay? Jelly asked as she walked into Hitoshi's room. Izuku shrugged. I guess. He lied and looked away from her. Oh dear. Jelly shook her head, and before Izuku knew it, she shoved herself against him on his bed. Izuku had to scooch over to allow her some more room. Jelly made herself into a loaf and then rested her head against his shoulders. She then sighed once she was comfortable. Izuku looked at her, and if he had an eyebrow he would have it raised. Are you going to say anything? He asked, and she looked at him. No, she stated. What's there to say? Fair enough. There you are. Brat came into the room next. I got cold. She half whined and then also allowed herself into Izuku's bed. She literally sat between Izuku and Jelly. Much better. Izuku's ears went back and he narrowed his eyes before turning to the side. This was fine. Oh, you're all in here. Erg. Izuku could feel a headache forming as Tiny Tim came trotting in. Like the two before him, the little munchkin cat wedged himself on the tiny bed in a way that he was resting his body under Izuku's chin. Tiny Tim stretched himself out and clawed at the fabric of the bed. This is nice, he purred. Izuku snorted a little. I'm glad you guys are comfortable. No, Izuku stated firmly when Pumpkin came into the room. The orange cat looked at the other cats, then at Izuku. No, growled, but Pumpkin didn't care. The orange cat, who was getting larger by the day, came up and then stepped into the bed. No, Izuku batted at Pumpkin with both of his paws. There's no room. Pumpkin paid Izuku no heed. He stepped inside the tiny overfilled bed and then laid down. Because of the compact space and many cats, Pumpkin was forced to lay on top of Izuku. Come on. No means no, Izuku yelled. Suddenly he felt a tongue against his face. Izuku couldn't tell who was attempting to bathe him. He had to guess because it was coming from his right. It was Brat. NPH. Stop. Izuku tried to move away but was squished between Pumpkin, Brat, and Tiny Tim. He had nowhere to wiggle out of. Suddenly a second tongue joined the first. Izuku grumbled as another tongue joined in. I'm clean, he grumbled, but he felt his anger and sadness slowly start to dissipate. A set of teeth started to gnaw and help get behind his ears. Why are you guys doing this? Izuku asked while trying to suppress his purring. Jelly shrugged. You were sad, was the only response she gave before resting her head across Brat's back. Pumpkin continued to run his teeth along Izuku's ear while Tiny Tim used his paw to drag Izuku's face closer to him while he lapped at Izuku's cheek with his rough tongue. Then it slipped free, a purr. Oh, all four of them said while looking at him, not in surprise, but in glee. Izuku felt the tips of his ears heat up and he quickly hid his face in his paws. Do it again, Jelly urged. Izuku relented and allowed himself to purr. Yeah, he was sad, but somehow these cats always knew how to put him in check and cheer him up. The next morning Izuku witnessed something he never thought he'd see, an angry Hisashi. Hisashi wasn't angry at the children, or even the cats. No, he was angry at their neighbor and he was letting his anger show. Train it or leash it, Hisashi yelled to their neighbor as the two of them met at the backyard fence and were practically nose to nose. The Hisashi was referring to was the neighbor's new dog. Hisashi's ire came from the fact that the dog, an Akita mix, had managed to wiggle under the wooden plank fence and charged at Eri. Eri was, thankfully, right at the back door and managed to rush inside, but not before screaming about the monster outside coming for her. Hitoshi ran and shut the sliding door before the dog could charge inside right after her. He nearly shut the door on the dog's snout, it was that close of a call. The dog, the size of a husky and black and white in color, slammed into glass. It let out a series of loud barks while snarling and dragging its claws along the glass, scratching it. Bite, bite, small animal, bite, the dog yelled as it zoned in on Brat on the kitchen table. Pumpkin and Izuku both let out hisses while their fur rose and they got on their toes. It was a moment where they were both in agreement that this dog was encroaching on their territory. Hisashi was quick to grab the dog by the collar and get it back to its side of the fence. Hisashi was livid. Thus, the commotion happening right now because let me tell you something. I will not hesitate to kick your dog in the face if it comes after my little girl like that again, do you understand me? Well, if your cats wouldn't taunt her, she wouldn't have crawled under the fence. My cats, buddy, only 2 out of the 5 cats I own go outside and they don't taunt your mutt. They weren't even out. They're inside. You cat people. The neighbor waved Hisashi off. You might want to keep them away from my yard then. Who knows what might happen? If you touch my cats, you're going to have more than me to deal with, Hisashi growled between tightly clenched teeth. I promise you. That was the end of their exchange with the man dragging his dog inside by the collar. Hisashi came back inside and shut the door firmly. Bastard was lucky Shouta and Oboro both had business to attend to. He growled while storming into the kitchen. Shouta wouldn't have hesitated to show that dog the end of his boot for coming after Eri like that. It was truly a scary sight to witness as Hisashi slammed cabinets and drawers. He was livid and it was showing. Both Hitoshi and Eri went to great lengths to stay out of his way. Hitoshi went as far as to hold on to Eri, but staying huddled in a corner to try and stay out of Hisashi's line of sight. After a few seconds, Hisashi put his hands on the counter and just stared at it. Several exhales left his mouth as he forced himself to calm down. Okay. He clapped his hands and turned to the children, only for that smile to fade when he saw how Hitoshi had curled himself around Eri to protect her from any blows that may come their way. Hey, he was gentle and took a few steps forward but didn't completely approach. I'm sorry, he whispered, and he squatted down. I wasn't mad at you two, I promise. Hisashi continued to be gentle. Hitoshi was careful as he looked cautiously at Hisashi. I lost my temper and you shouldn't have seen that. Come on. Hisashi offered his hand to the two of them. Hitoshi looked at Eri, who still had tears in her eyes from the whole incident, then back at Hisashi. His own hand was shaking, but still, he reached out for the blonde. They held hands and Hisashi helped them both stand up straight. There we go. Now why don't you two go and get dressed for school and I'll whip us up a quick breakfast. He urged them away. Both children would hurry away to get dressed, and Hisashi looked down at Izuku once it was just them. Would you have kept calm? He inquired. Izuku shook his head. Yeah, I thought so. It should be me. No, me. You fuckers have the intelligence of a dipstick. Obviously, it should be me. What was one of fighting about so early in the morning? Only the most important decision regarding their class for the next 3 years. The class representative and vice representative, and everyone wanted to be in those seats. It shows leadership skills and being able to handle a large crowd of people. Izuku watched, mildly amused by the whole thing from his usual spot on Hitoshi's shoulder. When they walked in that morning, some people shot him wary glances. However, he's proven that he's docile when Ochako was the brave soul to reach out and pet him with permission. If you want to risk it, be my guest. Were the exact words Hitoshi had told her, and she had. She scratched against Izuku's ears and he leaned into her touch, purring loudly. The moment he was shown as docile, the class relaxed and others wanted to pet him, which he allowed. Back to the point at hand. The class wanted a rep and a vice rep. The problem, everyone wanted to be it, and the solution came from Ida. A tally system, completely anonymous, as they would write who they wanted on a piece of paper and hand it to Ida and vote for who they think should be rep, and second place would be vice rep. It was so obvious that Ida wanted to be class rep with all this planning. The second problem, everyone would just vote for themselves. However, Mr. Aizawa was growing impatient in his sleeping bag, so they rolled with it for now. Ida was adding the names when Denki hopped from his seat once Ida was done. Kaminari Denki was grinning as he took the marker from Ida. You forgot someone, my dude. Denki grinned devilishly, uncapped the pen, and added a new name at the very bottom. I can assure you I did not. Denki moved to reveal Moss's name. No, he's part of the class too. Denki fought and blocked Ida from erasing Moss's name. He has a point. Siro was grinning from his seat. I agree. Moss should have an opportunity. He's a cat. Ida argued. Who's like wicked smart. Denki fought for Moss and suddenly he came up and picked Moss up. Hey, Hitoshi snapped. We discussed this, but his words went on deaf ears as Denki put Moss in front of Ida. He had Moss by his underarms. Also, are you going to deny this face? Denki demanded. Go ahead. Tell him he can't participate because he's a cat. Discriminate against his feline race. Do it, he ordered. Izuku rolled his eyes at this. Ida sucked in a calming breath and spoke gently to Denki. It is not discrimination. Moss is a cat. Moss cannot give out orders. Moss is a service animal, who is here because his owner has a severe shellfish allergy and could die if he ate the wrong thing. Moss had a screaming fit at All Might yesterday. Moss is not a part of our class. All Might is correct. It is asinine to treat him as such, but fine. If you guys wish to play, I will play. Moss's name can stay up, and I expect you all to take this seriously because there are no do-overs. Moss won, by a lot. Izuku was sure nearly every girl in the class voted for him because a lot of the girls didn't have marks by their names. Denki also didn't have a point by his name, which told Izuku enough, and neither did. How are you going to vote for your own cat? Ida demanded of Hitoshi as he chopped his arm in the boy's general direction. Thankfully, he was far enough away that Hitoshi didn't see it as a threat. Hitoshi shrugged. I'm biased. Okay, it wasn't completely anonymous after all. So, Moss was the class representative, with Yaoyorozu being the vice representative as she got 2 votes. Izuku got to bask in the glory for all of 5 minutes, especially when Bakugo started screaming about how they never should add Moss in the first place and threatened to beat Denki into the ground. Still, Izuku knew it couldn't last. He looked at Yaoyorozu and patted at her hand to get her attention. She looked down at him. Yes, he simply moved so he was beside her on her right and she was technically in front of him. Koda, can you please tell her I stepped down to vice rep? Izuku inquired. Koda looked nervous but shakily stood and did just that in a quiet voice, telling Yaoyorozu exactly what Izuku said. Oh, are you sure? I mean, we do have a translator. Yaoyorozu reached up and patted Izuku between the ears. I can't use Koda like that. So, I'll be a silent vice rep. Koda paused, smiled softly, and repeated it to the class word for word but not before adding a soft thank you at the end of his sentence and sitting back down. So yeah, Izuku's now the vice representative of a class. That's something he'd never thought he'd see in a million years, especially not as a cat. Those reporters are the worst, Monoma grumbled as he sat next to Hitoshi at lunch. Yaoyorozu was sitting with them as well. Izuku was vigilant on Hitoshi's shoulder, now officially in service animal mode. Tell me about it. Hitoshi shook his head. I walked to school with Eri. One of the reporters tried to grab her this morning and I nearly used my quirk on her. Then a reporter grabbed at Moss and I actually had to use my quirk, he admitted softly while eating from his bento. I know the feeling. Yaoyorozu shook her head. One of them made a grab for me and just, thank goodness for Bakugo. He grabbed the man and tossed him down. Kaken doing something nice. Izuku almost couldn't believe it. Hitoshi ate a few mouthfuls of rice. I don't understand why the teachers just let them stay at the gates like that, he admitted. Because they haven't harmed anyone yet, and because they haven't crossed the gates. Also, they're civilians, Monoma informed Hitoshi and then went for his own lunch. The moment the lid was cracked open, Izuku smelt it and he let out a hiss as a warning. Monoma stopped and looked at Izuku in alarm. Izuku was staring intensely back at him. What's in your lunch? Hitoshi asked without stopping his own eating. Shrimp curry, Monoma whispered, clearly confused. Good boy, Moss. Hitoshi gave Moss a piece of his salmon, which Izuku took happily. He's not angry with you. He's warning me that someone at this table has shellfish, Hitoshi explained, and Monoma let out a soft "oh," and then went to his food. So, Yaoyorozu, how's your chow chow? Hitoshi asked, changing the subject. He's getting up there in the years, she admitted sadly. It won't be too long until. She licked her lips sadly. ... But he's hanging in there. I know what you mean. Monoma joined in. My poor Tweety is nearly 8 years now. It's getting hard. Tweety is Monoma's pet budgerigar bird. One he got when he was 7 and has been raising them ever since. Hitoshi met the bird once, they bit his finger. Hitoshi looked over at Izuku and Izuku could see the thought forming in his head. Will you die of old age? Or will you just keep living? That's a question Izuku asked himself on many occasions, especially late at night when there's nothing but silence and his thoughts to keep him company. He thought long and hard about it and didn't know if he wanted to outlive Hitoshi and the others. Suddenly the lights above them turned a dark red and everyone jumped. We have a code red. Everyone is to report to the mess hall at once. This was quickly followed by an alarm. What the fuck? Hitoshi whispered while looking at Monoma and Yaoyorozu for answers. Someone bypassed the barriers. Yaoyorozu got up quickly, and Hitoshi and Monoma followed her suit. They hung back and could see everyone panicking and running for the main hallway for safety. Hitoshi nearly followed suit, but his arm was grabbed by Yaoyorozu. Everyone is going to crowd around the main hallway to get there. Follow me, she ordered. We'll go down a path that others don't know about. This is why I wanted you to lead. Izuku knew his choice was a clear and good one. The three of them avoided the crowds by going down a staircase that also went down to the first floor. How do you know about this? Hitoshi asked her as they ran. I studied the ins and outs of this place like my life depended on it. I wanted to make sure I was fully prepared for anything this school threw at me, she stated firmly and didn't even break a sweat as they rushed towards the mess hall where they were instructed to wait until further notice. Izuku wasn't surprised that there was virtually no one in this place, mainly because he knew everyone was still upstairs in the main hallway. They weren't alone, however. There were a couple of third years in here who probably had the same idea as Yaoyorozu. Kitty, a girl with purple hair, bounded over to Hitoshi eagerly. She reached out and Hitoshi backed up. Service animal, he grumbled. Izuku nodded at this girl in a firm way and a no-nonsense face on. Oh, I'm sorry. Can I pet him? She politely asked and put her arms behind her back. Hitoshi nodded. If he wants you to. She reached and scratched at Izuku's head. He's adorable. Hey, Tamaki. Suddenly Izuku was grabbed. Hey, Hitoshi yelled. If you eat this cat, will you gain claws? Or cat ears? She gasped excitedly. Will you finally be a cat boy? Tamaki looked at her with nothing but anxiety in his eyes. Why would you ask that? He twisted and pressed himself against the furthest wall he could find. I just want to go home, he whispered. Oh, now this is a beauty. Izuku was grabbed out of the girl's hands by a burly blonde. The blonde had Izuku by his underarms and was holding him up like, I do not tolerate being held like I'm Simba from the Lion King. You forced my hand. Izuku warned this boy before he threw his head back and whined. Hitoshi, okay, that's enough, you're stressing him out. Hitoshi came up to the third year. Please, give me back my cat. He's a service animal. Oh, my bad. The blonde was gentle as he handed Izuku back to Hitoshi. Hitoshi held Izuku in his arms like a toddler. Thank you. Say, what's he for? I mean, I've heard of service dogs, but never a service cat. The blonde inquired in a gentle tone. I have a bad shellfish allergy. He detects that kind of thing, Hitoshi admitted. Oh, hey, Tamaki. Why don't you get a service animal, for your anxiety? the blonde asked his friend. His response was the depressed aura around Tamaki growing darker. Hey, I know you. Monoma sauntered up to the blonde. You're part of the big three. That's right. You're Mirio. That's me. The blonde grinned. And that's Nejire. Monoma pointed at the girl. She grinned and waved. And that's Tamaki. Tamaki whispered nervously. It's nice to actually get to meet you guys in person. Monoma politely bowed and Nejire grinned at him. I loved you guys in last year's sports festival. There's no need to be so formal. Wow. Nejire spotted Yaoyorozu and bounded over to her. You are so pretty. You'll have to tell me your secret. Yaoyorozu sputtered nervously, her face looking hot as she started to blush. I have so many questions. Monoma came up to Mirio. Mainly about your quirk. You see, I can copy quirks and I was just wondering if I can test it out on you. And then there were two. Hitoshi looked at Tamaki, who was still pressed against the wall firmly like he was trying to phase through it. The poor boy looked like a nervous wreck as he even started to quake a little. Hitoshi looked down at Izuku and Izuku looked at him. Then he nodded. They knew what they needed to do. Hitoshi walked up, pressed his back to the wall, slid down it until he was sitting, and then raised Izuku up like an offering. Do you want to hold him? He offered softly. Tamaki was absolutely shaking as he turned his head to stare at Hitoshi. You won't mind. I don't tell people this, because they might not take Moss seriously as a service animal. But the allergen detection is only part of his duty as a service animal. He helps keep me calm in stressful situations and he's damn good at it. Tamaki reached out and picked Izuku up. He held him against his chest and Izuku started to purr on command to calm the boy. Tamaki held Izuku similarly to how Hitoshi was just holding him, like a baby. He then slowly sat next to Hitoshi. I like your boots. He complimented Hitoshi's boots. Thank you. I like your eyes. Okay, he panicked. Sue him. Tamaki smiled and scratched Izuku under the chin, making another purr leave his chest. He's a sweetheart. You said his name was Moss. Yep, or Mossy if you'd rather. Or Spicy. Izuku continued to loudly purr as Tamaki continued to stroke under his chin. You're right, he is good at this. I feel calmer already. It felt like an eternity they were waiting in that mess hall. But eventually, others did come and the place started to fill up rapidly with students. Tamaki handed Moss back after a while and the two went on their separate ways. Hitoshi wasn't too thrilled to hear that it was just the reporters that came storming past the barrier that caused all of this ruckus. But he was glad it wasn't anything too dangerous. Never a dull day in heroics. He could only tell himself with a headshake. Never a dull day. The voices were closer this time. Closer than normal. It's nearly time. A blurry figure moved in front. I don't mean to question you, but will he be ready? Of course, he has to be. The hand reached for him, but stopped. He was just right there. He tried to move his hand up, to reach for the hand, but it required too much strength. What about the girl? The girl. Yes, the hand moved away to face the second blurry figure. Do what you want with her. I have no need for her any longer. Release her, kill her, it's entirely your choice. Very well. The hand came back around and reached for him once more. Soon, but for now. Dream. Izuku's eyes snapped open and he quickly jumped to his feet. He looked around quickly and relaxed after a few seconds. He was in bed. Tiny Tim on his left and Brad on his right. Everything right as rain. Everything good. He made himself into a loaf and shut his eyes. Dream, my son, I wish I could see you. To compliment you and tell you that you look as perfect as the day you were born. As when you were alive. The voice was soft, fatherly in tone. Izuku stared blankly at the man in front of him. This man was his father. He searched through his memories. Because he was Izuku Midoriya. My father ... has black hair ... You have no hair, Izuku whispered. Nor do you have a face. Yes, I apologize for any confusion ... Come here. His father, sitting in a bed, on life support, opened his arms wide for an invite. I can prove that I am the same despite my appearance. Izuku's body felt stiff, yet still, he came over into his father's arms. His father wrapped his arms around Izuku's body and pulled him down so he was sitting in his lap like he was a child. His father ran his fingers through his knotted hair. Do you remember when you would sit in my lap like this after you had nightmares? His father whispered. Izuku ran through his memories. I dreamt you hated me, he whispered as the memory started to become clear. Never, Izuku. In fact, if your memories are correct, from what all of us saw, what drove you to harm yourself? What drove me to my death? Izuku whispered and his father tutted his tongue sternly. No, he whispered and gently pulled Izuku in. He caressed Izuku's arm. You're not dead, not anymore. His father's mouth pulled a frown. I just need to find the right quirk. I got lucky with that blood replenishing quirk to keep your blood from coagulating while in that body. The regeneration quirk is doing a good job at healing your head. His father reached up and touched the back of Izuku's head. Izuku gasped a little when his father touched the crack at the back of his head. I should consider a transferring quirk to get you in a stronger body. To transfer your consciousness, but he swallowed hard. Well, try that on another day when you start to be more like, well, you, father. The door to the room opened and Tamura, as well as Kurogiri, came through the doorway. Both of them laid eyes on Izuku and then on All for One. We're getting ready to leave. All for One nodded. Izuku, do you remember those that hurt you? Izuku squeezed his fists tightly as a sudden anger flooded through his veins and his very being. He gnashed his sharp vampire-esque teeth together in anger. Bakugo Katsuki. And, All Might. He hissed between those new teeth of his. I hate them. I hate them both. I want to see them pay. He said every word with venom and vitriol. His whole body bristled as his anger rose. I will scratch Bakugo's eyes with my claws. If he tries anything, and I will never ever forgive All Might for what he said to me. He looked at his fingers. I didn't give you claws. All for One whispered. Regardless. Yes, my son. Let that hate fuel you. Use that hate against them. Don't forget you have a copying quirk on you. The one I managed to get, combined with the shape-shifting quirk, should allow you to take any quirk you desire, as long as you have the blood of that person. Yes. Yes. Izuku relaxed and fell into a bit of a lull. I will use their own quirks against them. Make them pay. And once One for All is mine, it'll be my gift to you. To my son. All for One whispered, and he finally let Izuku go. My son that I have brought back from the dead, who will punish those who pushed him over the edge. Izuku shut his eyes. He could see something just off in the distance, and he reached for it. What's he doing, Kurogiri? Tamura inquired as they watched him raise his hand up, reaching for that thing just off in the distance. Izuku felt his father's hand reach, touch his arm, reach some more, before touching his hand. He then held onto Izuku's hand. The figure behind Izuku's closed eyes moved closer, reaching for him just the same. Do you see something? All for One asked after a moment. I do. His eyes are closed, Tamura stated softly to All for One. What are you seeing that we aren't? Just a little closer. If he were just a little closer. The barrier between them was too far. The figure was just a little too blurry to make out any features. But there was one feature that Izuku could see. Purple. Moss. Itoshi gave his cat a gentle shake. We're coming up the unforeseen simulation joint, you have to get up. Izuku smacked his lips and lazily laid his head back down. He didn't want to get up. His head hurt. It hurt bad. In fact, it's been hurting all day. From the very base of his neck was where it started, and it was throbbing upwards to the very back of his skull. He wanted nothing more than Tylenol every time he was forced to open his eyes, which was why he's been sleeping a lot more often today. He just wanted to sleep the pain away. I can't believe he's still asleep, he heard Denki say. Denki sounded too close to for this be in the classroom. So, Izuku was forced to crack an eye open. No, they were on a bus. Not only were the seats a dead giveaway, but all of the students looking over the seat at him in worry from every angle told him that as well. He spotted Tsu, Kirishima, Ochako, Denki, and Aoyama all stared at him. On a normal day, he would try and play with one of them, maybe bat at Tsu's long green hair like it was a toy, but not today. Not with this migraine he had. I don't think he's been feeling good at all today. Hitoshi whispered and picked Izuku up to cradle him against his chest. Maybe I should leave him with Aizawa. Hitoshi quickly corrected his mistake. Were you about to call him? Tsu stated, but Hitoshi cut her off. Nope, was not. He's still sleeping, came the familiar voice of Aizawa as he was probably coming over to check on the commotion. He's awake but not very energetic, Hitoshi whispered, and Izuku could feel the rumble of his friend's chest make the pain in his head intensify. I'm honestly a little worried. He didn't act like this before, not even with the mold. Hitoshi dropped his voice into a hardly audible whisper, but because of the fact that so many were staring they probably heard. Hand him to me, shouted demanded, and Izuku was passed on. He hardly raised his head. He didn't have the energy to do so. He just gave a weak mew once and shouted his arms. I'll keep him with me while you guys train. I hope he's just tired. Shouta whispered. What do you mean by that? Hitoshi was smart as a whip and picked up on Shouta's tone. Shouta shook his head. Don't worry about it, kid. But I need to ask. Has he been drooling uncontrollably at all? No. Hitoshi shook his head. Has he been walking straight? I mean, when he does walk the few steps he can, yeah. Why? Any vomiting? No. Okay. All good. Hopefully. Shouta held Izuku in the very crook of his arm, and then he stalked back to the front of the bus. Dude. He was asking if Moss has been poisoned. Kaminari whispered to Hitoshi once the teacher's back was turned. Poisoned? Hitoshi bristled at the mere idea. Yeah, now that I think about it, poison cats often act really lethargic, Tsu stated rather sadly. But Hitoshi grabbed onto his hero costume. That can't be right. Aoyama suddenly added in. It is. The things he was asking sounded like poisoning symptoms for animals. Not only that, but I have had some sad experiences in this field. I had a beautiful dog, but she barked a lot. Our neighbor hated dogs and hated how often mine would bark. One day, my dog comes inside. She was like Moss at first, lethargic and sluggish, not wanting to get up. Then the next thing we know she's vomiting, drooling, and seizing all at once. We would take her to the vet, but alas. Aoyama shook his head sadly. She didn't make it. We later found she's been poisoned with rat poison. We knew it was our neighbor who did it as we don't own the stuff, but had no proof. Bad neighbor. Hitoshi was reminded of the altercation just a day prior, and he bit his lip nervously. Stop it, you guys. Ochako hissed to all of them. Suddenly she then reached over to Hitoshi and put a hand on his shoulder. Mr. Aizawa was just making sure he didn't have poisoning symptoms. Hitoshi. He's not saying that Moss has actually been poisoned. She reassured him and squeezed his shoulder. And these four aren't helping. She growled to her classmates. Besides, even if he were poisoned, we all know Moss can come back from the dead, right? Hitoshi almost fell for her trap. Almost. He rolled his eyes and slapped her hand off of him. Stop it. Damn it. She cursed our defeat. Hitoshi looked forward toward Shouta and Moss. I'm just going to take this off of you. He heard Shouta whisper as he removed Moss's vest. It made Hitoshi's heart spike with worry. He wasn't allowed to worry for too long as the bus came to a stop. There, 13 was waiting for them. Yaoyorozu had them get off a single file in a neat and orderly line. Hitoshi almost felt naked without Moss on his shoulders or Moss's leash in his hand. He looked over at Shouta, who was talking to 13 briefly before anything was said to the students. 13 seemed concerned about the cat in his arms, but Shouta explained it and she relaxed, but not before petting Moss quickly and gently. Then she addressed them. She spoke to them about her quirk and how dangerous a quirk could truly be if kept unchecked. How, if she wanted, she could kill someone with her quirk. Hitoshi was only half listening as his eyes trailed back over to Shouta and Moss. Shouta was giving Moss a little shake, but the cat did not move from his arms or even so much as stir. Did he die? Shouta and Hitoshi locked eyes, and Shouta just gave him a look that was telling him to pay attention to 13. Hitoshi didn't think he could, but he forced himself to at least look like he was, even though he was really watching Shouta out of the corner of his eye. They eventually moved into the USJ, which did cause a few people to giggle at the name as it resembled Universal Studio Japan. Once inside, Hitoshi was almost taken away by how big the whole area was and how many disasters it seems to hold inside. It was crazy. Izuku didn't die. He was just resting his eyes against the light. Really. It was strange. Behind his closed eyes he could see someone, a figure. And there was a string connecting them. He couldn't really describe it. It wasn't actually a string, but something resembling a string. He thinks. He patted up the figure, but something stopped him from getting too close. The blurry figure turned to him in alarm. Izuku tilted his head and the figure mimicked this movement before taking a step forward. Are you the cause of my pain? Izuku's voice mimicked as if the other figure was asking this question the same as him. Then, in his own voice, the figure turned and started to walk away, but not before saying something that turned Izuku's blood to ice. It's time. Izuku snapped his eyes open. They're here. He thought, all of his pain dissipating at that very moment as he jumped from Shouta's arms. Oh, Shouta gasped in alarm. There he goes. Izuku jumped to the railing in front of them and looked down intensely at the center of this strange area. Boss, he heard Hitoshi call him. Izuku let out a growl, low and threatening, while he continued to stare. He could feel it, the change in the air pressure and the weird thickness that started to fall around them. Izuku felt his fur bristle. Boss, Hitoshi sounded closer now and Izuku saw it. Orange smoke started to swirl around them in thick wisps. There, in the center of the area, a deep orange void that felt way too familiar started to open up into a portal. Then came a hand. Hello, Yue. An equally familiar raspy voice spoke through the portal as a lanky man with baby blue hair came through first. He had hands ... like ... disembodied hands were attached to him. Hands clutching his arms, his legs, and one hand planted firmly against his face, a clever way to keep his identity hidden. Shit, Shouta jumped on the railing with Moss. Is this part of train? And Hitoshi took another cautious step forward and Izuku turned and for the first time ever he hissed at Hitoshi. Hitoshi stopped dead in his tracks at his, and Shouta mimicked Izuku's exact words. Stay back. But what's Denki tried to take a step forward and Shouta wasn't having it. I said, stay back. He full-on snapped, making everyone stop dead in their tracks. Those are villains, he clarified. This isn't part of training. This is real and you are all to stay back. More and more and more. And more villains piled out of the portal by the droves. So many, too many. We were told All Might would be here today. We, the League of Villains, request his audience for today. The leader yelled loudly and Izuku's fur continued to bristle as he let out a hiss, as if that would stop them. In fact, we have someone here who really wants to meet him. The last person to exit stood by the leader. They were wearing just the same as the leader, normal blue jeans and a plain-looking green t-shirt. However, their face was hidden by a motorcycle helmet, the type with the reflective strip so you couldn't see inside. It almost looked ridiculous because the person clearly looked to be 13, maybe 14, hard to tell exactly with their face hidden, but there was just something about this person. something that made Izuku start to shake, something almost achingly familiar, something nostalgic. 13 Get the students out of here, Shouta yelled to the other teacher. He reached and grabbed his capture weapon, his eyes going bright red behind his goggles. He's going to fight them. Izuku realized. There are too many and he's best with one-on-one fights. Izuku felt his paws shift nervously. Dad, you can't, Hitoshi yelled, and Shouta looked back at him. Listen to 13, Hitoshi. I'll see you later. Then, just like that, he jumped. Then, the next thing Izuku knew, he was leaping down with him. What are you doing? Shouta demanded once he spotted Izuku joining him. Izuku only looked at him and winked. Izuku charged at the first villain in his path. The villain looked at him and laughed. But can't. Is that the best UA has to offer? The villain wasn't laughing when Izuku clawed himself up her legs and leaped high in the air once he managed to get a good enough way up. The villain certainly wasn't laughing when Izuku raked his claws down her face while coming back down from his jump. She wailed and screamed and covered her bleeding face with her hands. It was more than enough to stun her as Shouta wrapped her in his scarf, reeled her in just as quickly, and punched her square in the face, knocking her out instantly. There was no time for talking as Shouta shot his scarf out at another villain, one with guns for fingers. He couldn't use his quirk as Shouta was looking directly at him. Shouta's scarf wrapped around his arms and Izuku jumped on it. Using the scarf as a ramp of sorts, he charged at the villain and bunny kicked the man directly in the face with his hind legs, accidentally backflipping while doing so. You know, Shouta tossed the stun gun-fingered guy like he was nothing, knocking him out by slamming his head into the pavement. You're rather lively for someone who I thought died no more than 5 minutes ago. Izuku heard screaming and looked up to the second floor where the rest were. There was an orange mist surrounding the class for a few seconds before snap. It was gone, as were half of 1A. Here, kitty. I'm going to turn you into a bloody mash. A villain tried to grab Izuku and Izuku slipped between their legs and turned to bite down hard on their Achilles tendon right under their ankle. The villain screamed when Izuku felt something snap against his sharp fangs. Down like a falling building, the villain went clutching at his leg once Izuku let go. Motherfucker, Izuku snarled while he growled deeply. He looked for his next victim, his next prey to meet the ends of his teeth or claws, and he wasn't going to go easy. First, Hitoshi was on the ground. Then the next thing he knew, he was flying through the air with Mina, the both of them screaming as the ground was approaching and fast. It was somewhere along these lines did Hitoshi remember, oh right, I have a capture scarf. He then grabbed Ashido's wrist with one hand and pulled her into his body, and he grabbed his capture scarf in the other. He shot the scarf out to the nearest object, which happened to be a street light. It wrapped tightly around the arm of the light, and the two of them screamed as the momentum did not stop, and they did a whole circle loop around the arm of the light. They came to a halt after that terrifying moment with a sigh. For just a moment they both gave another sigh of relief before looking down. They were still a good enough ways off of the ground to twist an ankle if they landed wrong. Well, their savior came only moments later. Are you two all right? Takoyami jogged over to them from the ground below. Yeah, thank goodness for Hitoshi's quick thinking. Mina breathed out heavily and then looked down at Takoyami. Think you can help us down? Of course, Dark Shadow. On it. Dark Shadow shot out of Takoyami's body and grabbed Mina first by holding on to her. Once Hitoshi was sure she was stable, he let her go and Dark Shadow gently lowered her to the ground. Hitoshi waited for Dark Shadow to grab him, and once the quirk got a good enough grasp on him, Hitoshi unwrapped his capture scarf from around the light arm before he was lowered to the safety of the ground. Thank you, Hitoshi said to both Takoyami and Dark Shadow as he wrapped his scarf back around his neck. Okay, he breathed out and then looked around. They looked to be in a darkened city of sorts. Where are we? Are we still in the USJ? He asked. Yes, I believe we are. Takoyami looked up at the ceiling. Yes, Hitoshi realized. There was a ceiling, not a sky above them. What do those villains want with us? Mina whispered fearfully as she tugged on her jacket. What did we do? She gave a soft whimper and both boys had to think about it. They mentioned All Might, didn't they? Hitoshi asked. So, it might not be us, they could be after All Might. After all, he was supposed to be with us today. This is his class. Hitoshi whispered and brought his thumb up to gnaw on his nail and thought. But how would they know that? Mina asked, slightly panicked. Hitoshi just didn't know, and he continued to chew on his nail and thought. What if the reporters coming in a few days prior was just a distraction? He said as the pieces almost seemed to fit in place. Like, think about it. How could reporters get past the barriers to start with? Mina and Takoyami did think about it, and Takoyami nodded. You're right. It really doesn't make sense for simple reporters to be able to get past UAS barriers. With all of them on the campus, it would make sense that all of the staff would have their eyes on them and not on the actual threat. The villains. A chill swept over Hitoshi and he looked around, suddenly having a feeling of being watched. We need to leave, he whispered. Let's see if we can find a way out of this zone. As soon as he finished his sentence, the first villain made themselves known. Well, all three of them turned towards the villain in question. A man, at least 6 feet tall, dressed in some raggedy clothing that looked like it was sewn together by himself. He was scruffy with a scraggly beard and eye bags that could rival Shouta's or Hitoshi's own. He was flipping a knife up and down in the palm of his hand. His hair a wavy blue that hung down his face in oily curtains. Looks like we got a couple of Rugrats. The man grinned, showing missing teeth for a moment before his teeth suddenly showed up, showing that he had sharp, retractable teeth. Hitoshi got into a fighting stance and so did the others. The man held onto his knife tightly and stopped walking. Now, this doesn't seem like a fair fight. The man grinned. Why? Because it's 3-on-1 and you know you're going to lose. Mina growled while raising her palms up ready to shoot off her acid at a moment's notice. No, because you don't stand a chance versus all of us. All at once more villains emerged from the alleyways surrounding them. At least 5 or 6 of them, all in different shapes, sizes, and with different powers. The 3 of them were quickly outnumbered. Hitoshi grabbed both ends of his capture scarf in his hands and narrowed his eyes. You don't want to cross us, he snarled bitterly and got down in a stance ready to lunge like a wild animal. Aw, this one is spunky. I'm going to love it when I cut your tongue out with my knife. The man charged, and when he charged so did the other villains. Hitoshi immediately knew what he wanted to do when he and the man were close enough. As expected, the man pulled his knife back as he was getting ready to thrust it forward. When someone comes at you with a knife, I need you to remember these steps, Oboro told Hitoshi, and he put his goggles down over his eyes. Something he always did when training. Tim and Shouta were demonstrating for this, and then it'll be his turn against one of them. Shouta pretended to hold a knife. It was just a stick, and Oboro nodded at his husband. Shouta knew what to do and he charged, brought the knife back like he was ready to stab him with a violent thrust. Oboro was swift and he knocked the hand with the knife down with his non-dominant arm, and just as quickly he grabbed Shouta by the throat. Now Oboro turned to Hitoshi. I'm grabbing him by the throat. However, you're going to want to actually strike your opponent in the throat. Knock your first as hard as you can against their windpipe and they'll be down. The only reason I'm not striking him is because he's my husband, and if I hit him in the throat, I'll wake up to him strangling me. Damn right, Shouta smirked while looking at Oboro with a knowing smile. Hitoshi knocked the man's arm down with his non-dominant hand, cocked his dominant hand back and punched the man right in the windpipe. The man gagged before going quiet. His mouth was open and his eyes wide, but no sound escaped his mouth for several long seconds, so long that his face started to go red. Hitoshi wasn't done. Not by a long shot. Now, if your opponent is a man, there's something else you can do. If you really want your opponent down after you struck them in the windpipe, then you're going to pull them in. Oboro grabbed Shouta by his collar and pulled him in close. Like this. And you're going to bring your knee up and you knee them in the crotch as hard as you possibly can. Hitoshi grabbed the man by his raggedy jacket, pulled him in, and put as much force behind his knee as he possibly could. Finally, the man made a noise. A painful groan from deep inside of his belly before he just collapsed and grabbed onto his crotch while writhing on the floor. Dark Shadow. Hitoshi watched as Dark Shadow grabbed a villain, a woman, and threw her into a building. There was a sickening crash and thud as she broke through a window. Hitoshi saw movement out of the corner of his eye and he reacted by grabbed his capture weapon and wrapping it around the person rushing for him. He didn't see any features. No, the only thing his mind was to get this villain away from him. He pulled them in with capture weapon and gave them his boot directly to the stomach. The person gasped and Hitoshi threw himself backwards into an arch like he would when dancing, and he kicked the person from under their chin before doing a backflip and landing back on his feet. He breathed in and out heavily when the person fell back. These villains suck. He panted with a snarl and reeled his capture weapon back around his neck. Amateurs, he whispered. Hitoshi wasn't even the best at fighting. He was nothing compared to his fathers who had years and years of experience under their belts, and he was able to take down 2 villains. There was a scream from a voice that Hitoshi didn't know, and he turned to see another villain grabbing onto his face. Hitoshi saw blood and flesh leak down from between the man's fingers and felt sick. He then slowly turned to Mina. Mina had a pout on her face with her acid leaking from her fingertips. Hitoshi didn't have time to ask as he saw another villain coming up from behind her. Mina, he called to her and she turned, but it was too late. The villain grabbed her into a chokehold and put the first villain's knife to her throat. None of you move. The villain was a girl. A girl with the face of a Labrador and the ears to match. She snarled, showing off her canine-like teeth. Both Hitoshi and Takoyami stopped. That's better. The villain grinned and looked down at Mina. Don't you dare use that acid of yours on me. Girlie, I'll slice your throat to shreds. The villain growled aggressively. Why are you doing this? Hitoshi asked while keeping his hands up so the villain can see he had nothing. What did we do to you? He whispered, and the dog girl smiled an unsettling smile. We're here for All Might. You pups were just caught in the crossfire. And we were given permission to do whatever we wanted with you brats. That's all I needed. Hitoshi was actually happy as he used his quirk. The woman went under in a matter of seconds. Let her go, he ordered, and the woman did as instructed. Mina rushed to Hitoshi's side but still stood her ground. Hitoshi scratched his face as he thought about what he wanted to do with this woman. He looked around for what to do and he spotted some abandoned rope. "Give me that knife," he ordered, and she handed him the knife. He then walked off to the rope that was on the road. "Help me tie her, please," he asked of his classmates, and they did just that. They tied her tightly with the rope around her ankles, and then they tied her hands behind her back. Hitoshi even tied her mouth shut. "I'm going to let her go when we get out of this zone," Hitoshi told the two of them, and they looked at the bodies of the unconscious villains surrounding them. "Takoyami," Hitoshi turned towards his classmate. "Can Dark Shadow fly above the buildings to find the exit?" he asked, and Takoyami nodded. "Yes, Dark Shadow, please lead us out of here," he instructed, and his quirk flew high, high above the fake buildings. There was a silence as they all waited with scared and bated breath. "It's this way." Dark Shadow pointed towards the east. "Let's go," Takoyami called and took off in a run. Before others show, Hitoshi nodded firmly. "Agreed. Yeah, let's get the hell out of here." Mina was right behind them, and the three of them took off in a run for the exit. As they were running, Mina looked at the knife still in Hitoshi's hand. "Are you keeping that?" she asked him, and he nodded. "My quirk, as you know, isn't the best for combat. And my baton will only make welts, not great for fighting off people who want to kill you," he told her. "So, I have some better defense," he whispered and looked at the knife. It was a hunting knife. Not something you want to mess with, as the length was large and will do damage for sure. "I won't use it, not unless I have to." Mina nodded. "Might as well," she whispered to him. "This isn't a game, and these people mean serious business." She wasn't kidding there. So, in his other boot, Hitoshi stored his new knife. He hoped he wouldn't have to use it, but knew that it was there just in case. Izuku was panting. Shouto was panting. Both were reaching their limits, but the villains just kept coming. One by one the villains were brought down by Shouto. Izuku just did a good job at stunning them. His teeth had bits of flesh and blood on them from how many of them he bit. One by one they bite the dust. The leader cooed from a rock he was sitting on as he watched this. "I should have known these villains were second-rate. Wouldn't you agree, baby brother?" he asked while turning the other that was swaying from side to side. The one that, as Izuku got closer and closer, looked just so familiar despite not being able to see their face. The person just continued to sway, not saying anything, just observing. Another villain down, kicked unconscious by Shouto. Izuku charged at another villain. He clambered up the villain's leg, only to be grabbed by the villain in question. The villain grabbed him by his head. "I'm going to snap your neck." The villain roared in anger and applied pressure. His hands were close to Izuku's mouth, and Izuku sunk his fangs into the man's palm. He felt the skin snap as he poked through it. The man screamed in pain. Izuku tasted blood as he lifted his fangs out and then reinserted them into the wound. "Fucker." The man gave up on trying to snap his neck and just threw him into the water. Izuku flew before he hit the cold water. Izuku was wet and his equilibrium was thrown off when he did a flip in the water. Once he was able to get his bearings in the water, Izuku swam up with a gasp. He started to swim back to the shore, which wasn't too far. As he swam, he saw the villain with a helmet come up to the shore. "Baby brother?" the leader asked. Izuku, realizing what was happening, tried to turn around, but it was too late. He was picked out of the water by cold hands. "Release me," Izuku hissed and yowled as he struggled to strike at the villain. The villain remained silent with only a soft leaving his mouth. A capture scarf wrapped around the villain's arms, and Izuku turned to see Shouto in the air getting ready to kick the villain right in the head. His boot made contact with the helmet. There was a loud crack as the villain's body tilted heavily to the side from the attack. Izuku was dropped and he scrambled for safety. The helmet cracked at the side, the reflective glass hardly hanging on. The villain fell on their side almost lifelessly. There was a growl, and before Izuku knew it, the leader had Shouto's throat in his grasp. "Don't," the villain hissed between tightly clenched teeth. "Don't touch my little brother." Shouto breathed in and out heavily, cocked his arm back, and went to throw a punch. Shouto stopped as a sound of pain escaped his mouth, and Izuku saw it. The villain had Shouto's forearm tightly in his grip. All 5 fingers wrapped around the flesh that was starting to crumble into dust and bleed as he went down to the muscle. It only took a second for Shouto to get his bearing back. He activated his quirk, stopping the villain's own quirk, and then he slammed his shoulder into the villain's chest to get him to let go. "You must be the final boss." Shouto snarled and jumped back a few steps. The villain laughed a sinister laugh. "How perspective? Yes ... and no. Isn't that right, Izuku?" Izuku's ears perked. "What?" he whispered as he looked at the villain, but the villain wasn't looking at him. He was looking the person wearing a helmet. They stood slowly and started to remove their helmet. Izuku's mouth dropped open in shock as they realized why this person looked and felt familiar. Because it was him. It was his body. "That's not me," he whispered and felt frozen in place. His legs started to rock together as his fur rose. This him was different than he remembered. His skin was gray, the freckles along the body muted in color. His green eyes lightless and not as vibrant. Dark bags under his eyes, he almost looked like he wanted to go to bed. The baby fat around his face gone. Now his face was slightly gaunt. Shouto turned and his eyes went wide just as well, and he took a step back. He breathed, his voice failing him and his breath actually hitching. I saw you die, he whispered almost fearfully. It was the first time Izuku has ever seen Shouta look like that. But he couldn't blame him. He was afraid too. That hurt. The voice sounded so similar to his own, but lifeless and tired. He touched his head where he was starting to bleed, where glass had cracked into the side of his face. The blood started slow, but it soon flowed over his eye, the first bit of color to be seen on this not Izuku. He touched the blood. I saw you die, Shouta yelled again. How is this possible? He demanded in a sudden fervent anger. Anything is possible in this day and age of quirks, the leader yelled. And my little brother has lots of them, why don't you show him? Izuku Midoriya has no brothers. The fake Izuku grabbed Shouta's arm, and before Shouta could stop him, he sunk his teeth deep into Shouta's forearm, drawing blood from the man. Shouta did not punch this fake Izuku like he would any other villain. No, he pushed him away. Granted, he pushed the boy hard enough to send him flying to the ground. Izuku felt afraid as he watched this not him get him slowly, his arms dangling in front of him, and he started to laugh. The laugh was slow, almost like his movement. He moved his head up and smiled, showing teeth that Izuku knew for a fact that he didn't have before. His canines were now sharp and almost fat. They were like vampire teeth. You taste delicious, this fake Izuku whispered before his features started to morph. His body became larger, thicker in every way. His hair straightened and became just straight black. His body continued to change until he was a complete exact copy of Shouta. His breathing suddenly hitched as he looked at his hands. He opened and closed them rapidly like this was the first time he's ever done this. The leader patted his shoulder, keeping his pinky up and away. How do you feel? He dipped his head back, letting his newly blackened hair fall back with this movement. Then he opened his eyes and erasure activated and he looked directly at Shouta. Oh ... now, this is a quirk. He grinned in Shouta's direction. I demand answers, Shouta yelled loudly, his anger never leaving. Not once, just fear. It made the leader look at him almost boredly. I saw that boy die. I know he died. How is he here? You're too loud for my liking, Eraserhead. Kurogiri, can you do something about him? The actual Izuku and Shouta, were so wrapped up in this fake Izuku that they failed to realize that the orange portal guy had come to join them. A portal formed directly from under Shouta, and just like that he was gone, the portal sucking him and then spitting him out somewhere inside of the USJ. Izuku's fur rose and he just stared at his not self in fear. This can't be happening. This can't be happening. He thought over and over again. Tamura Shigaraki, I'm sorry, but one of the students managed to escape. Oh, Kurogiri. The leader Tamura hissed and began to scratch furiously at his neck. If you weren't our ticket out of here, I might have dusted you for this. He growled and then looked over at Izuku. Dad, no. Izuku turned to see Hitoshi, Takoyami, and Mina rushing their way. However, they were smart enough to all hang back and not get too close. Dad, huh? Tamura whispered and then turned to the fake Izuku. Well, I guess Daddy should go to his boy, huh? The fake Izuku titled his, Shouta's, head and started to step forward. That was when Izuku, the real Izuku, snapped out of his fearful state. He charged and put himself between Hitoshi and whoever the fuck this is. Of course, this made the clone, yeah, that sounds better, a clone of him stop and look down at him. That cat looks familiar, Tamura whispered while staring down at Izuku. Izuku snarled and puffed his fur up. Moss, it's ... it's Dad. Hitoshi stepped forward and, once again, Izuku turned and hissed at his owner. Stay back. He cried and prayed that Hitoshi understood that he wanted him to stay away. He then growled at his clone slowly and dangerously. Then, he charged. He knew his chances were slim. He knew what he was doing was dangerous, but, damn, he was caught with a speed he didn't expect from his fake self. He was grabbed from around his neck and the fake him squeezed. His breath was immediately taken from him. He waited for the snap of his neck or to black out from lack of oxygen. He didn't expect a mouth, nor teeth. His head was shoved into the clone's mouth. Izuku tried. God, did he try. Those teeth clamped down on his neck and his head was forcibly ripped away from his own body. Those moments before death was a pain he never wanted to feel again. The pain of his flesh tearing and his spine snapping in two. Hitoshi stood there, a soft cry leaving his mouth as he watched his foster father rip Moss's head from his body with his teeth. Blood. Moss's blood spilled endless from his decapitated body and stained his father's shirt and pants. He then dropped Moss's body in a puddle of blood. Hitoshi's mouth opened in pure horror as he could only shake and tears just fell down. He thought Moss's first death, being stabbed, was bad. Mina put her hand to her stunned mouth as she started to shake violently. Even Takoyami looked horrified at the sight before him. Shouta spat Moss's lifeless head out of his bloody mouth almost lazily. He raised his bloody hands up and started to lick them clean. Brutal, the leader laughed. Just absolutely brutal. Hitoshi's mind finally caught up to what happened and he screamed. Moss, he wailed so loudly that his own voice echoed fully around them all. Tamura, we should leave. The portal villain warned Tamura in a sharp tone. The heroes will be here any moment. Warm, Shouta spoke softly, causing everyone to look at him. What? Tamura asked. The shape-shifting quirk started to end and Shouta began to melt away. Hitoshi knew, deep down, that it wasn't his father that bit Moss's head off, but he was glad to know that it really wasn't him but a boy around their age. This boy was completely naked once Shouta was fully melted away. He was looking at his hands. His skin was pink, hair a curly lively green, and his eyes ... His eyes looked so similar to Moss's it made Hitoshi want to cry. Warm, he whispered in amazement. That cat ... made me warm. Huh, could he be quirked? Tamura asked. Hitoshi knew exactly where this was going and he shot his scarf out, wrapping it around Moss's body and pulled his headless cat into his arms in his panic. I'll take that as a yes. What quirk does that cat have? Hitoshi wrapped his body around his cat and ducked down. This boy seems to know more than he's willing to tell. Tamura scratched at his neck. Baby brother, do what you must. I can't. What? I can't hurt him. Why? I won't. There was a firmness in this boy's voice that made Hitoshi start to shake. The boy approached and that was when Mina and Takoyami jumped in front of him. Dark shadow shot out from Takoyami's side. The boy stopped and then squatted down to stare intensely at Hitoshi with a gaze that could make Shouta shudder. I know you, he whispered. I don't know. Hitoshi breathed as tears fell from his face and he continued to hold Moss tightly. I don't know you. I don't know you. He continued to cry. I know a lot about you, like your shellfish allergy. Hitoshi shook even more, if that were possible, and he slowly turned to stare with the other boy. They locked eyes and Hitoshi only felt fear. I know your uncle beat you with a wooden spoon and put you in a muzzle. There was an almost demented smile on this boy's face showing his vampire teeth. The teeth used to decapitate Moss. I know how much you love marshmallows, to the point that you have to stop eating them because you'll eat a whole bag in a day. He put his hand down and started to walk like he was on all fours. Stop it. I know how you're making strides in ballet about how afraid you are of the cellar but won't tell anybody. They were so close now and Hitoshi looked into those green eyes and he swallowed hard. Moss, he whispered, feeling completely and utterly stupid. But the thing was, Moss was the only soul he told about the cellar. Nobody else in the family knows about Hitoshi's fear of the cellar door. Only Moss. This boy tilted his head slowly. There was a knowing in his eyes as he reached out. Hideshi. There was a suddenly and violent bang as the doors to the USJ were blown open. I was wondering why neither Aizawa nor 13 were answering their phones. I cannot begin to think about the horrors you children face, but fear not, for I am here. All Might's voice boomed loudly throughout the entirety of the USJ. It made Mina tear up. The villains that dared to try and fight him were knocked down like bowling pins. Nobody stood a chance against an enraged All Might, and in a matter of seconds All Might was there and the boy was knocked away by the wind the hero had created in his speed. Where's Aizawa? All Might demanded as he stood in front of the three of them. All three of them shook their heads. So, you've finally come, All Might, Tamura hissed. PSD, Hitoshi. Dark shadow poked Hitoshi's shoulder. I got his head. The quirk whispered and showed Hitoshi's Moss's decapitated head. Hitoshi was shaking. Thank you, he whispered and took his cat's head from Dark Shadow. He felt crazy as he lined Moss's head back up to his body. He then pressed his cat's head against the stump of his neck. He almost couldn't believe it when he watched as Moss's head started to thread and fuse with his neck. He quickly looked back up to see All Might and Tamura were still talking. You villains have gone far enough. Why is that child naked? He demanded while pointed at the boy who was being helped up by Kurogiri. Kurogiri's orange smoke patted against the boy's shoulder. Tamura almost looked smug as he crossed his arms. Come on, All Might, don't you recognize him? Granted, last time he was wearing clothing. His face should still look familiar to you. All Might looked at the boy and narrowed his eyes. I see. When I told you to be more realistic. This is not what I meant. He spoke almost solemnly to the child. You. The boy snarled between clenched teeth and put his hand to his face. He dragged his hand down, scraping his own nails against his face. You. Liar. He screamed. Motherfucking liar. He cried before almost seeming to fight with himself for a moment. Do you not see what you have done, All Might? Tamura asked while pointing at the boy who was thrashing around. Do you not see how you've hurt him? How you've drove him to be like this? Do you not see that you're more harm than good? What are you talking about? All Might. What the fuck? Bakugo, Kirishima, and Todoroki came rushing up and Bakugo stopped so suddenly that he actually slid on thigh. Bakugo, for the very first time, looked afraid as he stared at the boy. What the fuck? What the fuck? What the ever-loving fuck? Bakugo started to move back on his hands. You. The boy almost seemed to contain himself for just a moment as he glared down at Bakugo. I hate you, he hissed. Deku, I went to your funeral. Bakugo stood up quickly and pointed at the boy. I saw your body in that casket. He yelled accusatory at the boy. What kind of sick joke is this? What do you mean, young Bakugo? All Might demanded with wide, almost knowing, eyes. What do I mean he killed himself? Bakugo yelled to the symbol of peace. Hitoshi's blood turned to ice and he looked down at Moss, who was slowly healing. I did. The boy didn't deny it, and it seemed he regained control of himself as he stood up a little straighter. Those eyes, green eyes burning with absolute hatred and vitriol. Then ... he smiled. Do you want to see the crack in my skull, Kakin? His voice turned sickening sweet. Bakugo covered his ears. Stop it, he hissed. You're not him. You're not. The boy then turned to All Might. What about you, All Might? Would you want to see the crack in my skull from when I jumped off a building? This sick joke has gone on long enough, young man. All Might growled, and the boy just smiled, turned his heel, and pulled his hair back where, yes, there was a giant crack in his skull. Well ... it depend on your definition of crack. Hitoshi would call it a crater personally. A large gap in his skull showing a pulsating pink brain. Even regeneration can't heal this beauty. I think I'm going to be sick. Kirishima put his hands on his knees. You left me on that building that day, All Might. The boy snarled, his gaunt face twisted in anger. You told me I couldn't be a hero. You told me to be realistic. And you... The boy turned to Bakugo and kept that twisting snarl. You told me to take a swan dive off of a roof ... and I realize hey ... that's the most realistic thing I could do at this point in time. I jumped. He threw his arms out and laughed like it was the most hilarious thing in the world to him. I jumped. He continued to laugh. All Might, yes, All Might was shaking. I just wanted you to be safe. Fuck you. You told me to be realistic. And I do something realistic, and that's not good enough for you. The boy roared. And what's worse, you can't even remember my name. The boy you drove to suicide. Deku, shut the fuck up. The boy turned to Bakugo next with gnashing teeth. I want nothing from you. You were my friend, but you thought you were better than me and you turned into an ass. And once again, nothing bad ever happens to Bakugo Katsuki. But that's fine. I don't need you anymore, Kakin. The boy, Deku, walked up to Tamura, and Tamura put an arm around Deku's shoulder. He's got more quirks than he can count now. Tamura grinned. He doesn't need either of you. Izuku Midoriya. All Might softly spoke, making the boy turn and narrow his eyes. That was your name. I never forgot. Bullshit. Izuku made a motion with his hand, curving in a way that Bakugo does when he makes explosions. But he stopped and looked at his hand in confusion. Right, no claws, he reminded himself. Claws, the cat. Hand him to us, Izuku demanded while pointing at Hitoshi. Never. Hitoshi snarled and kept a tight hold on Moss. Tamura took several steps towards Hitoshi, but was stopped when All Might put himself in between them. His own face now twisted into a snarl. What do you gain from doing this to people like him? All Might demanded while pointing at Izuku. What does he gain? Tamura's eyes narrowed behind the mask and he grinned a devilish grin. Don't you know, All Might? Izuku is my baby brother. He's our father's son. The son that you and Boom Boom Boy pushed into suicide. Bakugo stood and raised his gauntlet towards Tamura and Izuku. You're not Deku, he finally growled. You may look like him, but you're not. Don't go acting like you cared for me now. You don't get that privilege, Kakin. Izuku didn't even look fazed. Don't act like you didn't cause the scares on my body. Don't act like you didn't make school hell for me. Now that Hitoshi was forced to look, yeah, there were a lot of scars on Izuku's body. Scars in the shapes of stars, even one in the perfect shape of a handprint on his waist. I will never forgive you for what you've done to me. Never. Bakugo's whole body started to shake. You're not him. You're right. I'm a better version of him. One that will make you bow to and beg for my forgiveness. A gunshot rang out and the boy's shoulder was shot through in a spray of blood. Master Tamura, Izuku, Kirigiri wrapped around both boys. The shots just kept coming, hitting Tamura and Izuku both in various places. Then, just like that, they were gone. I'm sorry for being so late, but I brought the teachers. Ada's voice rang out. Everyone was shaking now, and finally, Hitoshi was the first to break. He let out a loud sob as tears endlessly fell from his eyes. Mina collapsed next to him in her own fit of sobs and wailing. Young Hitoshi. I think Moss's All Might reached for Hitoshi's beloved cat, as it was clear he was dead. His head only halfway on at this point. Hitoshi jerked away violently. No, no, he cried. He's immortal. He's going to come back. Hitoshi sobbed out the truth. Something he knew he would later come to regret. But he was afraid that All Might would just take Moss from him if he truly thought he was dead. What adult wouldn't? Yeah. Hitoshi flinched at his Ash's yell and watched as he and Oboro made quick work of any remaining villains in their path as they worked together. Kids. Oboro came flying down on his cloud and stopped in front of all of them. He hopped off of his cloud and looked at them, checking for injuries. Papa. Hitoshi ran from his spot and ran into Oboro's arms. Oboro caught him in a hug. Hitoshi continued to sob. Hey, it's okay. It's okay, Oboro whispered while running his fingers through Hitoshi's hair. Where's Shouta? I don't know. He let out a shuddered sob. Oboro looked down and he paled at the sight of Moss and Hitoshi's bloody state. Hitoshi's hands were coated in flaky dried blood, and so was his chest from trying to shield Moss from the villains. Here, Oboro took his coat off and covered Moss, so the others don't question it. Just say he got hurt. he whispered. Aburo, Shouta, soaked to the bone, came swimming up to the shore with Tsu directly behind him. Minda was on her back. Shouta grunted and flicked the water off of him. He then put his goggles on his head and swallowed hard. He looked flustered and like he couldn't bring himself to say what he wanted to. Aburo came up and the two of them embraced. Hisashi was right behind Aburo and he pulled Shouta into a hug. I was so worried when you didn't answer your phone, Hisashi whispered to Shouta. Hitoshi dried his eyes and turned to see Tokoyami. The boy offered Hitoshi his hand. I'll walk with you. The others have already returned, he whispered, and Hitoshi took it. Thank you. He looked at Moss, but his cat was covered. The thing way, every time Hitoshi closed his eyes to even so much as blink, he kept seeing that other boy. The boy with the eyes similar to Moss's. The boy who crawled to him on all fours. The boy that knew everything about him, but he knew nothing about personally. The boy that Hitoshi, for a very real moment, was sure was Moss because of the amount of things he knew. Izuku Midoriya, Hitoshi thought, and his mouth went dry as he looked at All Might as they passed him. At that moment he remembered exactly what All Might said just a day prior. I don't know an Izuku. Hitoshi had the exact same thought as Moss and as Izuku at that moment when he and All Might locked eyes. Liar. Izuku and Tamura were thrown to the floor of the bar. Damn it, Tamura seethed as he started to scratch almost violently at his neck. We were so busy monologuing we never even got to attack him. Next time, he raved. Yes, young Tamura, next time. Now please, let me heal your wounds. Kurogiri got down and started to inspect Tamura's wounds. Cold, Izuku whispered while looking at his hands, his skin now gray once more. Here, Kurogiri was quick to make a portal so he could grab a blanket and wrap it around Izuku's shoulders. I'll look at you once I've finished with Tamura, just hang tight, Kurogiri told him and went back to Tamura. The TV flickered to life and their father could be heard, not seen. I take it did not go to plan. No, Tamura grunted. If we had the big Namu it might have gone better. Yes, I do agree, however, I had to pull regeneration somewhere for Izuku. Once I am able to get my hands on another regen quirk we'll try that Namu. Now, Izuku, how did your quirks work out? Izuku looked at his hands. There was this ... cat. He whispered. I bit him in. He has this quirk. I am unsure of what quirk ... but I felt warm. But Hidashi wouldn't give him to me. Izuku almost cried out in frustration. I don't understand. I'm his best friend. I didn't see a Hitoshi in your memories, their father said rather firmly. And you certainly didn't have a best friend. Regardless, this cat had a quirk. Yes, and I want it. I want to feel that warmth again, Izuku whispered as his hands continued to shake. I felt alive. He did gain some more color after he ripped the cat's head off with his teeth, but, baby brother, it's dead. The cat is no more. Tamura agreed. No, Izuku shook his head firmly. I can't explain it, maybe it's the quirk, but that cat isn't dead. That quirk made me feel alive. It's more than healing. Tamura lowered the hand from his face so he could look at his brother. Is it what you want, baby brother? More than a nothing. I'll see what I can do once I'm healed. The school was cancelled for the remaining 2 days of the week. Combined with the weekend, they had a grand total of 4 days off, which, honestly, Hitoshi was thankful for. He wasn't sure he could handle going to school after all that he had witnessed and learned. For the first time since living in that house, he went to Eri the night following the USJ, not the other way around. He was alone, and despite the fact that Pumpkin tried to sleep with him, he couldn't do it. So, he went into Eri's room for comfort because he was too proud to ask his foster parents if he could sleep in the bed with them. So, he went to Eri, and his little sister was more than happy to invite him into her bed. By Friday morning, the second day, Moss still hadn't woken up, but he was alive, just healing. According to the Fosters, this was longer than the time he got hit by the semi. It made Hitoshi more than a little worried. He knew that this was probably the most damage Moss has taken next to getting crushed by a semi-truck. So, it would only be logical that it would take so long for him to heal. Hitoshi checked on Moss that very morning. Moss was sleeping, healing in his little cat bed with a blanket over his body so as to not scare her. The first thing Hitoshi did upon waking up was pulling the blanket back. Looking better, he muttered. At least Moss had his fur back around his neck. Hitoshi narrowed his eyes and got a closer look at Moss's neck. That's new, he muttered once he saw a white jagged ring of fur around Moss's neck like a necklace. Hitoshi knew this wasn't a coincidence. In fact, when he flattened the fur with his hand, he was sure the newly whitened fur looked like teeth marks. There was a knock on his door and Hitoshi turned. Come in, he croaked out, and Hisashi poked his head in. His hair was down in a loose ponytail and it moved as he only poked his head in. How are you feeling? Hisashi asked in a soft voice. He would be lying if he didn't say he didn't have a nightmare last night. It was just that image, the image of Shouta completely ripping Moss's head from his shoulders. It was playing on repeat like some sort of sick video that wouldn't stop. He knew his face must have given his feelings away before Hisashi walked in and put his hand on Hitoshi's shoulder. It's going to get easier. Azashi whispered. "In Moss, healing still, but look." Hitoshi didn't pick Moss up. More rather, he moved to the side to show his foster father the new ring around Moss's neck. His fur turned white where he was. Hitoshi swallowed hard, and his mouth had a bitter taste in his mouth as the memory replayed quickly in his head. Azashi hummed in thought. "I wonder if it's like scarring." "You mean he was hurt so badly that his body couldn't fully heal it?" Hitoshi whispered almost fearfully. Perhaps, however, he was crushed by a semi and stabbed. But this might have been the first time he lost a body part, and you said it yourself, you had to reattach his head. Hitoshi's mouth twisted in worry as he stared down at Moss's newly whitened fur. "My question is ... what if? What if that guy would have swallowed his head? What if we never found it? What if he took it? Would Moss be here now? Would his head regrow? Would he be dead?" Hitoshi felt dizzy with all of these questions, and Hitoshi patted his shoulder gently. "Don't think about the what-ifs, okay?" Azashi whispered before leaning in and gently holding onto Hitoshi in a hug. "Moss is okay and healing. Shouta is okay save for a new scar. And you're okay, and that's all that matters," Azashi told him gently before pulling away from Hitoshi. "Let's give Moss some space to rest. He'll be back on his paws in no time, I'm sure." "Okay." Hitoshi gently put the blanket around Moss's shoulders. Now that his neck was healed, there was no need for secrecy. Azashi left, and Hitoshi quickly got dressed in his crop top hoodie and black baggy high-waisted jeans. He put his socks on and walked out of his bedroom, leaving the door cracked a bit in case Moss woke. Pumpkin let out a mew and rubbed himself needily against Hitoshi's legs. Hitoshi gently nudged Pumpkin away. "Maybe later," he told the orange cat and kept on walking. "Are you hungry?" Azashi asked, and Hitoshi made a bit of a face. "Not really," he confessed. He hasn't been hungry since the attack. He couldn't bring himself to eat all the first night. He only just managed to down some crackers and juice when his stomach threw a fit about the lack of food. "You have to eat something, Hitoshi." Azashi was already pulling a bowl out of the cabinet. "How about oatmeal?" "Just a little. I can try." "Can it be the dinosaur egg ones that Eri eats? I know I'm on a diet and all." "Absolutely." Azashi pulled the packet out and started to make the oatmeal for Hitoshi. Hitoshi looked around the quiet living room while Azashi made quick work of making the instant oatmeal. Brat and Tiny Tim were cuddling on the couch fast asleep and basking in the early morning rays. Jelly was poking her head into his bedroom, as was Pumpkin. Hitoshi almost went to shut his door, but was stopped when Azashi called only a second later. "Done." He put a bowl of steaming hot oatmeal on the table. So, Hitoshi let the cats be and went to sit at the dining table. He picked up his spoon and looked down at the colorful sugary dinosaur shapes in his oatmeal. He took in a deep breath, spooned a small bit up, and ate. It was super sugary. As expected, it was said to be maple flavor, but Hitoshi only tasted the sugar. He wasn't complaining. After a bit of silence, when Azashi came to sit with him with only a cup of coffee in his hands. "Where are Dad and Papa?" he asked after the silence became too much. "Out. They have to do something." Azashi sighed. "Unpleasant," he finished in a soft voice. Hitoshi looked at his food and took another small bite. "Did you ever have moments like this?" he asked as he twirled his spoon in the goopy oatmeal. "Moments where you couldn't eat, where it was hard just to wake up in the morning?" "Many times," Azashi told Hitoshi softly. "I would say my worst was ... when Oboro nearly died." Azashi nodded sadly at the memory. "I still have nightmares about that, and it happened back when we were all in high school. Oboro nearly died." "Yeah." Azashi shook his head as his voice turned solemn at the memory. "It was a scary time in our lives as we weren't sure he was going to make it. The three of us were interning and we basically got ambushed and separated. To make a long story and painful memory short, a building fell on top of Oboro. By all accounts, he shouldn't have lived, but we managed to recover his body from the rubble," and Azashi smiled. "Only Oboro. Sure, he was in a coma for a few months and lost his eye, but he's alive and we're damn happy about it. I can't imagine our lives without him, in all honesty." Azashi played with his wedding ring absent-mindedly before smiling just a little. "Well, I'm glad he's alive even if I was." "What? One?" At the time, Hitoshi ate a little more food. Azashi reached over and patted Hitoshi's hair. "You know what's funny? You kinda look like him." "It's the hair. You both have the gravity-defying hair gene." Their moment was disrupted when someone knocked at the door, making both of them turn toward it. "Now, how could that be?" Azashi muttered and got up to check the door while Hitoshi finished eating his oatmeal. Turns out he was a little hungry after all. "Hitoshi, you have guests," Azashi suddenly said from the doorway, making Hitoshi perk up. "I do." He almost couldn't believe it. Sure enough, when Azashi moved to let the guests in, their Monoma, Momo and Takoyami were. Takoyami looked a little more embarrassed as he looked around the house in stunned surprise. "Guys, what are you doing here?" he asked as he stepped up to them all. "We came to check up on you, of course." Monoma scoffed as he came up and grabbed Hitoshi by his arms. "Are you all right? I tried texting you, but you never answered." "Oh right, he put his phone on silent last night because it was blowing up." blowing up mainly from his own class wanting to talk about what happened and he just couldn't. So, he put his phone on silent and forgot all about it. "Sorry for worrying you guys. I had my phone on silent all night," he told them while scratching at the back of his head. He then looked at Takoyami and Takoyami looked at him before suddenly gaining an interest in the pictures on the walls. "I figured as much, but still, I had to make sure you were all right." Momo sauntered on up to him. I heard about Moss. I'm sorry, he was such a good cat." Momo shook her head and Hitoshi felt both relieved and a little confused. He knew he announced Moss's immortality around 6 people. Todoroki, Bakugo, Kirishima, Takoyami, Mina, and All Might to be exact. Had they not blabbed? Or ... even better, did they not believe him and just thought he was delusional with onset grief for his decapitated cat? This relief didn't last long and even Hisashi knew why. Because Moss was going to be coming back to class with him sooner rather than later. "Hitoshi, I think you have to tell them." "You don't have a choice because they're going to find out sooner or later." "Tell us," Momo asked with a head tilt and even Takoyami perked with wide eyes. "Tell us what? What all do you know?" Hitoshi asked. "I know what Mina told me." Momo admitted first that his head was bitten off. She looked sick as she said this. "That's what I was told through the grapevine." Monoma let his eyes lower. "I thought there's no way. But they mentioned the cat was green." He tutted his tongue and shook his head firmly. "Disgusting. How could someone do that to an animal?" "I was there so you don't need to ask me." Takoyami mumbled nervously. "Well, you're all right." His head was bitten clean off of his shoulders and Hitoshi scratched at the side of his neck. "Just follow me," he ordered and lead his friends to his bedroom with a wave of his hand. He knew they were giving each other concerned looks but followed him regardless. He walked into his room and paused. At some point, Moss had not only woken up, but all of the other cats had decided to join him in bed. Moss looked blearily and weak. His whole body was shaking as he let out a weak mew the moment Hitoshi and he locked eyes. Hitoshi's breath hitched with happiness at seeing Moss up and awake. "Hey, buddy," he whispered and quietly got down on his thighs once he was next to the bed. Moss let out another weak meow. "Oh my gosh," Momo whispered the moment she and the others laid eyes on him. She put both of her hands to her mouth in shock. Monoma put one of his hands to his chin as he stared wide-eyed at Moss. And Takoyami ... well ... he didn't look shocked at all. "So, you were telling All Might the truth when he tried to take Moss's body from you?" Takoyami asked and Hitoshi nodded. "I was." Guys, Moss is immortal. It's either that or he has a healing factor so powerful it could heal that boy's head. He thought and felt his stomach churn. He let the sentence drop and turned to pet Moss gently. Moss was still shaking while letting out another weak meow. Brat started to run her tongue along his head to help comfort him. Regardless, Moss is a fighter both physically and mentally, as I'm sure you're all aware. "How did you guys find this out?" Momo's voice was soft as she stared at Moss with wide disbelieving eyes, like she was trying to see if this was a different cat. Hitoshi looked back down at Moss and felt his mouth twist just a little. "Well, I was the first. I witnessed him being stabbed." Hitoshi rubbed his nose with his thumb while he couldn't make eye contact with his friends. "He died. I know he died, but a couple of hours later there he was again. The Fosters saw him get hit by a semi and sure enough 12 or so hours later there he was up and on his feet again. Honestly, his quirk is a miracle in its own right, but he's smart, as you guys guessed by now. Even Nedzu says he's practically human with his intelligence and understanding." Moss suddenly stood up, making everyone look at him in surprise. "Moss, you need to." Hitoshi grabbed Moss to put him back down in his bed with the other cats. Moss, in one big movement, attached his claw to Hitoshi's sleeve. "Oh." Hitoshi gasped a little when Moss used a little strength to keep himself attached. "Okay. Okay." He put a hand on Moss's rump and another on his back and held his cat in a hug. "Are you aware that if the Hero Commission learns of an animal like Nedzu," Monoma whispered almost fearfully, "they'll try and take him, doubly so for his immortality. They'll want to know his limits." Takoyami added while shoving his hands in his pockets. "You need to keep this quiet." "I know." Hitoshi held on just a little tighter to Moss. "Trust me, I know. I wish I never would have opened my mouth during the USJ, but All Might was going to take him and I couldn't bear the idea him being taken from me like that. So, I panicked and let the truth slip. You could blame hysteria and nobody could fault you." Takoyami squatted down and reached out to touch Moss. Moss's ears went back and his eyes narrowed slightly. "I don't think anybody believed you when you said it." "Takoyami has a point, Hitoshi." Monoma nodded towards Takoyami in question. "Just leave Moss at home from now on." Well, Moss had something to say about that. As he turned and looked at Monoma, he let out the weakest hiss. "I don't think he likes that idea. We'll think of something. For now, I'm just glad he's okay. I was really scared he wouldn't fully heal from this." Hitoshi pulled Moss in just a little tighter. "I won't lie, I don't like that idea either." There was a knock and all the teenagers turned as Hisashi opened the door. He poked his head in and smiled. "Hey, look who's finally awake." Hisashi gave a nod to Moss and then looked at the others. "Are you guys staying long?" I just need to know in case I need to make some extra lunches. The three of them looked at each other and then at Hitoshi. Hitoshi looked at them and smiled. I could use the company, he told them, and they nodded firmly. Yeah, if it's not too much trouble. Yaoyorozu stood and then bowed. Thank you for your hospitality, Present Mike. Oh, we're outside of school. There's no need to be so formal, Yaoyorozu. Hasashi smiled before leaving for only a second as poked his head back through the door. Moss. He addressed the cat. Moss slowly blinked while looking at the blonde. You hungry? Shouta made a bottle for you. Moss's ears went way back as a look of irritation crossed his face. Hasashi frowned and sauntered over. Don't get me that look. Come on, you need to eat and you're too weak to hunt, and I know for a fact you won't eat kibble. Hasashi grabbed Moss by his middle and tried to take him. Moss clung to Hitoshi's sweatshirt. Moss meowed and Hitoshi didn't need a translator to understand when no was being said. Yes, Hasashi argued. Another meow of no, as Moss refused to let go of Hitoshi's hoodie. Yes, Hasashi, clearly knowing how to deal with a stubborn cat, leaned down and used his fingers to press under Moss's paws to force his claws to retract. Once Moss was freed, Hasashi hoisted him up and held him like a toddler. I'll be back. You kids have fun. Moss let out a hiss. Yeah, you baby. Hitoshi smiled a little before standing. Come on, I'll show you guys around. I'm sure Eri will be excited to have some company as well. As the others piled out, Hitoshi stopped Momo for just a second. So, you and Monoma, I understand showing up, but Tokoyami, he whispered once it was just them. Momo shrugged. He found me. He knew we were close and he wanted to check on you. I was already on my way with Monoma and figured it wouldn't hurt. Hitoshi didn't know how to really feel about that. It wasn't bad. He just never would have expected it. Shouta thought the hardest thing he had to do was tell a mother that her 13-year-old son killed himself. He was wrong. Way wrong. This was the hardest thing he had to do by far. Inko sat at the couch, the Bakugo sitting with her, save for Katsuki, who was standing with his arms crossed and a scowl on his face. Then, on the opposite side of the couch stood Shouta, Oboro, and All Might. Inko's eyes were already watery, despite the reason for their visit having yet being stated. Shouta was sure his presence alone told Inko that something bad must have happened. He cleared his throat and pushed a paper on the coffee table for her. I'm sorry to have to ask you this, Ms. Midoriya, and it's not an easy ask, but we heroes are requesting permission to excavating Izuku's grave. It wasn't just Inko who gasped, but Mistuki and Masaru as well. Why? Her body shook as tears started to fall. Why can't my baby just rest? She asked through her tears before she started to sob. Masaru reached over and patted her hand. Shouta shut his eyes as the real hard part was coming. There is no easy way for me to say this, but we believe Izuku's remains were stolen. The sob that left her mouth was absolutely heartbreaking. She covered her hands with her face while letting out loud and shuddering sobs. No, it can't be. She cried into her hands. Mitsuku quickly got up to hug Inko tightly. Are you sure? Mitsuki asked in her own small voice. Are you absolutely sure? Her own body began to shake as tears perked in the corners of her eyes. Shouta looked from her to Katsuki. Katsuki had looked away now and was facing the wall, his own body shaking. No doubt remembering the thing he encountered just a day prior. This is just to be 100% sure, he told the woman as he resisted the urge to paper even closer to Inko. Why would someone take his remains? What sick joke is this? Masaru demanded. He's just a boy. It wasn't like he was buried with jewels or anything like that. Maybe ... it was the suit. Inko said between sobs. You guys did make it for the Fu funeral. They didn't rob him for a dumb suit. Katsuki spoke for the first time, now fully with his back turned toward all of them. His whole body shaking now as it seemed like even he was fighting back tears. What do you mean by that? Mitsuki started while wiping her eyes, and All Might stepped in to gently get them back on track. I apologize, but we're sidetracking here. Young Izuku wasn't robbed for any possession he may have had on him. We just believe that his remains were stolen for villain purposes. No, Inko all but screamed while clasping her hands over her ears. Shouta and Oboro both turned to glare at the #1 hero. All Might quickly put his hands up. Apologies. All Might bowed. But it's the truth and we just need to be absolutely sure it was his remains. Which is why we're here to request permission to look into his casket. He told Inko, and the woman started to weep and blubber helplessly. This can't be happening. This can't be. She cried while shaking her head vigorously. I know it's hard, but we're begging you to allow us to do this. This way, if this is the case, we can find the sick people responsible. Shouta gently requested. Inko sniffled, though it did little to help her as she had both tears and snot running down her face at this point. What did I do to deserve this? She asked herself. Yet still, with a shaky hand and an equally shaky signature, through her own tears that splattered on the paper before her, she signed a barely legible signature. Find the bastards that took his remains and make them pay. Mitsuki demanded through clenched teeth before she helped Inko up. Come on, dear. Me and Masaru will make you some tea. Neither of them talked as they got to the car. Once the doors were shut, Oboro turned in the front seat and slapped a now deflated Tashinori Yagi. "Why don't you just tell that poor woman her son's a zombie? Have you no compassion?" he demanded with a snarl. Tashinori looked stunned for a moment. "Of course I do," he snapped back. "We weren't getting anywhere by talking in circles, and that woman deserved to know that her son's remains were stolen by villains." He yelled back while holding his cheek. "Cleary, you don't have compassion. Not for her son and not for her," Shouta grumbled while clicking his seatbelt in. "What? Driving that poor boy to suicide wasn't good enough for you, Yagi?" Tashinori frowned before looking down at his lap. "I didn't think you would." "No, you didn't think. You certainly didn't think when you left him on the roof of that building, did you?" Shouta hissed as he felt his eyes glow. "He was 13. Let's just go." They would unearth the grave hours later. Oboro and Shouta both had to open casket open once it was out of the grave, as they refused to let Tashinori near it, as they feared the casket was empty. "How are you feeling, Moss?" Nedzu asked after Shouta dropped Izuku off in the office that Monday morning. "Okay." Izuku shrugged half-heartedly before laying down on the desk. "Oh, you don't look okay." Nedzu reached over and picked him up. "Not only that, but you got new colors," the stout observed while holding Izuku by his underarms to observe the new marking around Izuku's neck. "Why, that almost looks like O." Nedzu's eyes went wide as his ear twitched lightly. "Yeah, oh." Izuku's ears went down. "Nothing humbled me faster than that." He looked down at the ground below. Nedzu placed Izuku back down on the desk and sighed heavily. "We're looking into who stole your body," Nedzu quickly informed Izuku while typing away at his computer. "We have an idea, but I figured I should ask you as well. Are you aware of a man that goes by the name of All for One?" "All for One?" Izuku perked his ears up a little at that name. He then shook his head. "No. Did he take my body and make me that thing? The gray skin, lightless and dead eyes, and gaunt cheeks. That's not how he remembered himself before he jumped. We have reasons to believe that, yes. Though, at the moment we have no solid proof. Well, we might. Izuku, who is your biological father?" Izuku looked at his paws. "His name is Hisashi Midoriya. He has a fire-breathing quirk." He looked down at his paws. "I haven't seen him since I was 8, maybe 9. Obviously, before I jumped. 5 years ago, basically," Nedzu whispered while looking almost grim. "I was afraid of that." He let his teeth glitter and then looked at his screen and went quiet as he typed and looked to be researching something. After a prolonged period of silence between the two, Nedzu clasped his paws together and turned to look at Izuku. Despite him being a rat-bear-dog stout creature, Nedzu's face was seen as pained and awkward. "I was fearful of this, and I do wish I wasn't the one to tell you this. Hisashi Midoriya doesn't exist." Izuku flicked his ears. "Pardon?" he whispered, completely stunned at the news that was given to him. "I don't believe I heard you right. Hisashi Midoriya isn't a person that exists." Nedzu spoke again, only this time a little slower so Izuku heard, and hung on every word that left his mouth. Izuku just stared at Nedzu. His mind was trying to put the pieces together, to do the math. It just wasn't adding up. "But, I don't understand." He shook his head when he and Nedzu locked eyes. "Let me just give you the theory both All Might and I have come up with." Nedzu focused all of his attention on Izuku and even made it a point not to break eye contact to let the cat know just how serious this was. "Providing the information we know with what undead you and what Tamura Shigaraki provided us during the USJ and eyewitness accounts. Your body was used by your father to bring you back into, most likely, exact revenge on those that drove you to suicide. That's outlandish. My dad isn't some evil mastermind with the ability to raise the dead. He can breathe fire and he's some guy. He's just a guy." Izuku's paws twitched, and before he knew it he was pacing the desk at a fast rate. "Izuku, the last time you saw him around 5 years ago. What happened?" "I dunno. I was 8 or 9. Izuku stopped his pacing and sat down. He shut his eyes as he tried to relive the day he last saw his father. Hisashi held on to Izuku tightly, holding the boy in his arms while running his fingers through his curls. I dreamt you hated me." Izuku cried into his father's chest. "Like everyone else, because I'm quirkless." Izuku continued to weep. "No, Izuku, never." His father pulled him in tightly and looked at him, his red eyes soft with kindness. "If anything, I'm relieved." Relieved? Yes, quirks are becoming too powerful with too many drawbacks nowadays. The last thing I need is for you to get hurt because you don't know how to control or tame a power. However, let me give you a little secret. Come closer." Izuku moved closer to his dad as instructed, and his father whispered into his ear, "I have a surprise lined up for you, but I have to go out and get it first." His dad then pulled back and kissed his forehead. "So, be a good boy and I'll see you when I come back from this business trip, okay, champ?" Izuku needed eagerly, his nap nightmare now all but forgotten in his mind. "Good boy, I love you so much." His father stood and put a hat on his head. Izuku loved watching his dad put his hat on because every time he would his hair would change colors. He didn't think Izuku would notice, but Izuku always did. It was a shame that the color was always white and not something cool like blue or red. Asashi turned to Inko and kissed her cheek. I'll be back soon, I love you. Then his father was gone. Izuku ran to the fire escape once his father was out of the doorway. Out on the balcony, Izuku leaned against the railing and waited. He always waited. Soon, his father would walk down and out of the apartment, and he did. Out of the apartment. His father turned his head up towards Izuku and Izuku always waved back. Always. Then, he was gone around the corner, never to be seen again. He had a meeting, I presumed. I never asked about his job too much. Izuku made himself into a loaf before too long as he stared at the intricate lines of the wood on the desk. He said he had a surprise to give me whenever he came back, kissed me on the forehead, and he left. I never saw him again, which, I guess, was odd considering that he always told me how much he loved me and Mom. Izuku shuffled his paws. I just figured that it was because of my status at the time. And, now I'm going to ask you something a little sensitive. Do you remember the day you jumped, more specifically the words you and Toshinori exchanged about his injury? How can I forget? I mean, I did try and headbutt him there because I knew exactly where it was. Izuku almost wanted to laugh, but he didn't. Instead, he felt his tail flick lazily as he recollected the conversation with All Might he had before. Well, he said he got it from a fight with a villain 5 years ago. No. Immediate refute. My father is a businessman. A businessman that doesn't exist. Izuku. Nedzu was firm but not unkind in his tone. I really need you to understand that and listen. Asashi Midoriya isn't real. But All For One isn't. All For One fought against All Might 5 years ago. If your father was All For One, it would make sense for him to want to bring you back. Izuku shook his head. He turned away from Nedzu. My father isn't that deranged. He was a man that loved me until I was diagnosed and then he left. That's what everyone told me. Izuku now stood and walked to the edge of the desk where he sat and peered out of the window. That's what Kakabakugo told me. Izuku almost wanted to cry. This couldn't be happening. It didn't make sense. Yes, Bakugo Katsuki will be dealt with accordingly for his role in your suicide. Trust me, but this isn't about that. Izuku's ears went back as he stared out at the early morning outside, at the still dewy grass that was visible from this high up, at some students. 1B as Izuku could see Monoma outside exercising under Vlad's supervision. Despite his wanting to refute and fight Nedzu on this whole ordeal about his father, his curiosity was just too strong. Let's say you're right. He turned to Nedzu. Just who the hell is All For One and why did he fight All Might? Why did he injure All Might like that? My father could breathe fire and that's it. Nedzu sighed and pulled his chair out. Sit. He offered his lap up and Izuku, though a little stunned, wasn't turning down this opportunity. He jumped into the principal's lap and sat. Once seated, Nedzu patted him while speaking. Nedzu spoke at length about a man who was 200 years old and had the ability to take quirks at his will and even give them out if he saw fit. This man had a brother who was sickly and quirkless, a brother with a strong sense of justice and hated what his brother was doing with his quirk. All For One loved his brother, but to the point of possession, as he locked his sick brother away in a vault to keep him safe. Eventually, it was revealed that his brother did have a quirk called One For All, a quirk that helped him get better but could also be passed down. It was the only quirk All For One couldn't get his hands on, and it infuriated him. So, for the next 200 years, All For One made it his mission to get his hands on that quirk, even if it was the last thing he did. The last fight he had was with All Might, and he was declared dead. Until recently, when Izuku Midoriya's body is now missing from its grave and walking around with more quirks than he originally died with. You see, young Izuku, from what I was told and from my own research into the subject, a quirk isn't a universal thing. There are people whose body can't handle having such a thing, and sometimes when All For One would give a quirk to those that asked for it, their body wouldn't always take well to such a power. Sometimes their body would reject and fight off the power. Other times, in more extreme measures, their bodies would become catatonic. Nedzu explained. It doesn't explain how he could use my corpse and make it walk and talk, Izuku whispered while looking away from the principal. I know, we don't fully grasp it either, but we're going to get to the bottom of it, okay? I don't suppose you have a picture of All For One, do you? Izuku sighed. That would put this whole "is he my dad or not" thing to bed. No, do you? I'm a cat. Nedzu smiled at that and gently scratched under Izuku's chin. This forced a purr out of the cat. It also did something else. It made Izuku remember something. My mom. Izuku moved his head away to look at Nedzu. My mom has a picture of him, I'm willing to bet. We got professional photos done when I was 7. She might still have one on her, or at least laying around. Nedzu perked. That's perfect. Let me inform those looking into this case as soon as I can. Until then, would you like me to walk with you back to class? You are aware that the others are going to freak when they see me, right? Nedzu smiled a very much knowing smile. That's why I'm asking to walk with you. It was the pitying looks that Hitoshi couldn't stand the moment he walked into the classroom without Moss. Nobody bugged him. Nobody talked about it. Well, nobody except for Minta. Typical, the little grape struck when no teacher was around. You know, I'm surprised you're still here. I mean, I figured without your cat you would have dropped out. Minta shook his head. Dude, not cool. Denki sighed a little and then looked at Hitoshi. Seriously, I'm sorry about Moss. He was a cool dude ... when he wasn't screaming at All Might. Don't pity me yet. Hitoshi grunted as he took his seat rather unceremoniously. I'm not out of the game. I mean, I'm sorry, but am I the only one who thinks it's just a little sad that your cat had to defend you to start with? I mean, you're a human, an apex predator, and you had to get saved by a 5-pound cat. Minta was next to Hitoshi, and Hitoshi rose his nose in distaste. And you had to get saved by me. Sue's tongue flew out and slapped Minta across the cheek. And you're the guy. Stop talking about the fucking cat, you grape fucker. Bakugo hissed from his seat while glaring at Minta. How about you just stop fucking talking altogether? We're all still stressed from the attack and your whiny fucking voice isn't helping. Minta looked like he was about to argue but was stopped when Dark Shadow pushed him away from Hitoshi. He has a point. Stop talking. A few others agreed and Minta put his hands up. All right. I mean, I guess this just means Hitoshi can't hide behind his pet anymore. That's all I was trying to say. Hitoshi scowled and twisted in his seat to look at Minta. I don't need Moss to kick your ass from here to next Friday, he threatened. I'm really scared of a boy wearing a skirt. Minta put his hands up and smirked a little. You should be, Hitoshi growled and got up from his seat. You really should be because I don't only have about 75 centimeters on you, I also have about 45 kilograms. I can knock your ass out if needed, and you think it's a good thing to talk smack about my cat that I saw get decapitated. Takoyami came up and put a hand on Hitoshi's chest. Do not let him win, Takoyami urged softly, making Hitoshi look at his friend. Yaoyorozu also came over and stood on the other side of Hitoshi and put her hand on his shoulder. He's not worth it, Hitoshi, she whispered and pushed him just slightly. Hitoshi sucked in a slow breath before allowing himself to relax and slacken his shoulders. You're right, but I'm telling you now, Minta, I'm going to be the one with the last laugh by the end of homeroom. Then he backed up and got back into his seat. He propped an ankle up on the edge of his desk and Ida was by him in seconds. I understand that you're hurting, but if you're going to wear a skirt you need to at least sit like a Hitoshi raised an eyebrow. Say it, he urged. Like a gi you need to sit properly, Ida yelled finally, and Hitoshi smirked a little. He sighed before sitting up straighter and lowering his leg to the ground. Better? He asked with little resistance. Why yes, thank you, Ida, clearly used to resistance, sputtered before scurrying away. Before too long the bell rang and class got started when Mr. Aizawa walked through the doors. I'm glad you're all right. Their teacher started and shut the door behind him. I want you all to know before we get started. That hound dog has personally told me to tell you guys that his door is open if anyone needs to talk about what happened to them during the USJ. Personally, I'm glad you all are okay. He let his words hang in the air for a moment or two before moving on. Now, on to other matters. I hope you all have your game and are in top shape because the UA Sports Festival is coming up within the next 2 weeks, and if you want to shine, the Sports Festival is where it's at. The rest of homeroom was just about the Sports Festival and what to expect and why it was vital to stand out during the Sports Festival, as that's where all the heroes would be watching. Hitoshi hung on his foster father's every word. Near the end was when things got interesting. There was a knock at the door, and before Mr. Aizawa could say anything, the door was opened by Netsu. Then came the screaming. Moss came strolling in like he owned the classroom, ignoring the horrified screams from those that absolutely saw him die, minus Takoyami and Yaoyorozu, of course. Moss strolled on in and hopped up on Hitoshi's desk before jumping onto his shoulder with ease. Hey, buddy. He scratched Moss behind the ear. I knew it. Achako screamed while pointing at Moss accusingly. I knew you can come back from the dead. I saw his head get. Mina was actually shaking as she stared at Moss like he was some sort of eldritch god. I saw his headless body in your arms, Kirishima whispered as he stared at Moss almost the exact same way as Mina. Even Bakugo looked completely and absolutely stunned as he stared Moss dead in the eyes. You weren't kidding. He's immortal. Hitoshi now had to do what he did best when it came to Moss. Lie, as rehearsed by him, his fosters, and his friends. Oh no, he sadly shook his head. I'm afraid I was hysterical. I mean, my cat died. Some of you even witnessed this firsthand. Moss isn't immortal. He can still very much die. He just has a healing factor. His head was bitten off. Mina yelled. He looked pretty dead to me. Well, you see, I was able to get his head reattached as we got him to a vet. It's just a healing quirk, but it's not perfect. See the ring? Moss turned his head to the side to show off his new necklace, as they like to call it. I won't lie to you guys. It was iffy and we nearly lost him if it wasn't for a vet with an even more powerful healing quirk. I apologize for any confusion, but my cat is not immortal. He scratched the side of Moss's head as he spoke to his classmates. As I said, I was just hysterical with grief because I feared I had lost him. Bakugo narrowed his eyes at this. It was clear that he didn't buy it, not for a second. However, the others did buy it as murmurs and mumbles broke out amongst the class. Netsu was chuckling gleefully from the doorway. Oh, before I forget, so he doesn't get dress-coded. Nezu walked over and put the tie around Moss's neck, obscuring the white fur ring. Don't forget the tie next time. Farewell, students, he called as he left the room. The door shut and 20 gobsmacked students just looked at Hitoshi and Moss. Moss started to purr loudly from Hitoshi's shoulder before too long. School was ending and everyone was getting ready to leave for the day, ready to start their homework or just go home and relax after a long day. Hitoshi stretched his arms above his head and walked up to his dad's desk. I'm going to visit the library for a little while with Takoyami and Momo, just to let you know. I can walk home by myself. Shouta nodded while looking over the papers on his desk. Very well, don't stay out too late. You know Hisashi doesn't like you out when the sun is down. Of course, there was a surprised scream that made Hitoshi and Moss both turn in alarm. In the doorway, where everyone was crowding, seemed to be a commotion on the outside. You guys cannot be blocking our path, Ada yelled while chopping his hand vigorously at those causing said commotion. Hitoshi walked up and leaned into Jiro, who was standing in the back. What's happening? He asked, and she ticked her tongue a little. Looks like some classes are just ogling hours, she huffed in irritation. Sure enough, Hitoshi could see some of 1B and some other students standing around the door. Excuse me. He gently pushed through some of his own class to get a better look. There he is, the one with the cat. He heard someone whisper almost excitedly. Moss's ears went back and Hitoshi nodded. I'm with you, buddy. Excuse me. Some of us have things we need to get to and you're blocking us in. He told some of the onlookers once he was fully in the front. Why are you even watching us begin with? Isn't it obvious? Bakugo demanded as he walked up to Hitoshi. Not only are we the best class being one and all, but we just got attacked by villains and survived ... though ... not all of us should have. Bakugo narrowed his eyes at Moss as he said that. Regardless, they're scoping out the competition for the sports festival. Yeah, because some of us actually deserve a spot in the hero course, and the sports festival is a good place to show it. It's also a good place to show less desirable heroes in training, like someone who needs their pet to coddle them all day. So, I think you can kiss your place goodbye, Minda whispered, because of course the slippery fucker did as he passed Hitoshi by. He then turned and started to walk backwards, so he and Hitoshi were facing each other. You might as well put free space on your head. Hitoshi felt a growl leave his mouth, but was suddenly avenged rather swiftly when Monoma stuck his foot out and tripped Minda up. Hitoshi snorted a little and tried to hold his laughter in at this. You're right, Monoma smirked. At least about the whole undesirable student part. I'll be happy when I get your place in Wano where I belong. He boasted proudly and even put a hand on his chest. Bakugo, growing impatient, huffed angrily. Just ... get the fuck out of my way, you damn extras. He then pushed past several students. You can't just call people extras, Hitoshi called after the blonde. Are you trying to make them hate us more? Like I give a damn. He heard Bakugo snarl and retort. I have no problem believing that asshole drove someone to suicide. Hitoshi heard from behind and he turned to see Mina talking with Hagakure. You just expect better from those trying to be heroes, Hagakure whispered back to Mina. Guys, maybe there's a story. I mean ... that villain was crazed, right? Kirishima looked like he was trying to convince himself more than he was trying to convince them. Hitoshi didn't know why, but he looked at Moss at this exchange and saw his cat's ears were back in irritation and his face looked pain. Hey, Hitoshi looked over at them now. He had to say something, right? He was there. The others looked at him and he paused for a moment, unsure of what to say exactly. He licked his lips and then added, if that villain is to be trusted, it wasn't just Bakugo, it was All Might. Well, I mean, some things were confirmed. All Might did tell them to be realistic and Bakugo did tell them to what? Jump off a roof. However, considering that villain bit my cat's head off of his shoulders, it might be reasonable to assume that not all is what it seems. Don't just talk about it behind his back. Talk to him about it, Hitoshi told them before turning and stalking off towards the library, having to push past some of the others still watching their class do so. It was going to be a long 2 weeks till the sports festival. That's for sure. Did you tell Izuku Midoriya to take a swan dive off of a roof and pray for a quirk in your next life the day of his suicide? Nezu asked Bakugo Katsuki. Bakugo shut his eyes. Yes, he admitted with no resistance. Yes, I did. He heard a sigh of disappointment from behind and squeezed his eyes shut as he was sure Mr. Aizawa was shaking his head, the teacher just standing by the doorway. He was there to observe as, apparently, he was the one who found Deku's body. Lady Luck was laughing hard at Bakugo Katsuki. I see, and why? Why? Yes, why? What did you gain from saying such a cruel thing? Nezu demanded. Bakugo's mouth twitched. Nothing. I just wanted him to stop. Stop what? Living? No, Bakugo yelled and his breathing picked up. I didn't want him to. I didn't think he would. He bit his lip. I just wanted him to see how useless it was for him to even attempt at applying for UA. He had no quirk, and he kept going on and on about how he was going to be a hero. Nezu hummed softly and didn't look impressed. Not at all. So, if I got this right, your classmate had a dream of being a hero despite his unfortunate status, and you took that personally despite it literally having no effect on you. He looked down on me. How? What? How? Explain to me how Izuku Midoriya looked down on you. I mean, it must have been bad for such an extreme reaction on your end. Bakugo continued to gnaw on his lip, to try and push his damn tears back. Because he's Bakugo Katsuki and he doesn't cry. Deku cries. Deku cries all the time. Not Bakugo Katsuki. Just expel me and get it over with. He finally huffed out. That's why you brought me here, right? What you did was serious, Bakugo Katsuki. Serious indeed. Nezu looked at the file before him. Aldra here says you were a model student, and normally I would be inclined to believe such papers. But considering what happened at the USJ and witness testimony, Nezu took the file and put it in the trash. However, as a teacher and principal, I would be remiss if I were to expel you outright. Which is why I'm willing to give you another chance to prove yourself as hero-worthy. Seriously. I'm not done. Nezu silenced Bakugo swiftly. You were young and dumb when you made that comment, yes. But that is not an excuse because it was a year ago. So, we're going to discuss punishment. If you wish to stay in the hero course, there will be serious stipulations. For starters, mandatory anger management classes. Don't think I, nor Shouta, haven't seen how you treat classmates and peers alike. Constantly screaming, yelling, getting to people's faces, and abuse of your quirk are only a few things we caught. Nezu got up and started to pace. Okay, not done. You will not participate in the sports festival this year. What? A gasp of disbelief left his mouth. Yes, the sports festival is a privilege, Nezu stated firmly while continuing his pacing back and forth as he started at Bakugo with those beady eyes. You forwent that privilege in time to shine by saying as disgusting as telling a quirkless peer to take a swan dive off a roof. You see, the sports festival is to show off our heroes, and because you did something so unheroic, you don't deserve that privilege. Instead, during the sports festival, you'll be helping Recovery Girl with the injured, and she will report to me everything you say or do. He huffed angrily and turned his head away. Fine, still not done. There's more. Yes, Nezu chirped excitedly while clapping his paws. Because you won't be participating in the sports festival, you won't be doing work studies with your fellow student. So, it was talked about amongst us teachers, and Shouta here has offered to take you in during that week-long study. You'll be shadowing him and he'll be your mentor. Suddenly, Mr. Aizawa's aura seemed to grow darker and more aggressive by the second, and it made Bakugo sweat. He squirmed in his seat uneasily. Okay, he growled between almost clenched teeth. Not yet. Oh, come on. Bakugo wanted to cry now. Oh, this is just the start. You see, young Katsuki, you've single-handedly lost all of the trust of the staff with this, and you need to earn it. You need to be a model student from now on, and I mean a real model student. Not the fake student that Aldra sent me. Nezu gave his trash can a little kick as he said this. If you want our trust, you're going to have to earn it. That means missing out on more than just a few fun things that your fellow students will be doing. It also means listening to us and treating my school with the respect it deserves. No more screaming at other students. No more calling people extras, because you think you're the main character. Because that ship, young Katsuki, sailed when Izuku Midoriya. Nezu pulled a small picture out of his pocket and placed it in front of Bakugo. It was Deku's last school photo. He was smiling that dumb smile that Bakugo always remembered. He looked so different, so alive. Took a swan dive off of a roof with the hopes of getting a quirk in his next life. Soft classical music filled the dance studio. Izuku yawned as he watched Hitoshi dance with his fellow ballet peers. Hitoshi looked graceful and made this look effortless. Izuku was happy with how far Hitoshi had come. No longer the scrawny kid in a muzzle who wouldn't dare talk back to anyone. The Fosters did a great job at bringing Hitoshi and Eri both up. Izuku gave another yawn as he looked at the time. He still had an hour before Hitoshi was finished with classes. Yes, Izuku could nap, but he's been falling slightly lazy since becoming something akin to a house cat. He looked over at the doors and decided to go on a small adventure while he had the chance. Izuku stood, stretched his front legs, immediately stretched his back legs, and then took off in a trot towards the doors. He still had his vest on, so no human should bother him about being astray, not that anybody would. The door sensors caught Izuku and he was free. The outside was his for the taking, at least for an hour. He trotted forward with his head held high. What should I do? He wondered while walking down the sidewalk. He could hunt but didn't know what for if not for fat rats versus the small mice he gets at home. Coming up to an alleyway, Izuku peered inside. He was met with nothing of interest and kept on trotting along. He raised his nose up and sniffed. He stopped and looked around when a familiar scent caught his nose. His fur immediately started to bristle as he was expecting to smell this scent so soon ... or ever again. Izuku looked around and he spotted the person behind the scent. Janouchi Shinsu. The man was walking the opposite way of the dance studio. He had his hands in his pockets and his eyes facing forward. He looked as unpleasant as the day Izuku saved Hitoshi from his grasp. though he did look different in some aspects. His face, which Izuku never once really focused on, was gaunt, and his eyes, which bore the same color as Hitoshi's, were lifeless. His hair, a deep shade of blue almost identical to Ada's, was oily and looked unwashed. His clothes hung loosely off of his shoulders, showing weight loss. His face was scuffy, almost like Shouta's own face, but it was also riddled with adult acne as his face looked unwashed, the same as his hair. Izuku narrowed his eyes and crossed the road. He started to follow the man, making sure to keep his distance as this man would absolutely recognize him. Izuku padded along silently and just watched Jonouch's every move. The man would walk into a corner store, to which Izuku would duck into an alleyway and silently wait for him to come out, and he would. He would come out with a small grocery store bag in his hand and continue down his merry way. Izuku kept his distance while stalking the man as Jonouchi was clearly unaware. During the walk, Jonouchi reached into his bag and pulled out a cheap-looking beer. He cracked it open with one hand and started to drink from it. Yeah, that's what you need. Izuku rolled his eyes. It was 10 a.m. on a Saturday. Still, they both kept walking with Izuku, realizing that Jonouch's spatial awareness was garbage. Then again, he didn't expect much from a man that was having a beer at 10 in the morning. Although at one point in their walk Jonouchi did pause before turning around, but by the time he did, Izuku was already hidden. Eventually, they came to the destination and Izuku was honestly surprised. A cemetery. Jonouchi walked through the gates and Izuku paused for a moment as he looked up at the cemetery name. He then looked at Jonouchi, who was just walking forward with his beer in one hand and the bag in the other. Izuku knew he should probably just turn around and leave, but his curiosity was too big at this point, and so he pushed on. Down the rows of graves, the two of them walked with Izuku deciding to stay behind the graves so as to not be seen in case the bastard gets wise. Finally, they came up to the grave that Jonouchi was here for. Izuku stayed hidden behind the grave beside the one that Jonouchi was looking at and just stared. The man opened the bag and pulled out a small container of freshly steamed rice and he placed it by the tombstone. He then pulled out some incense and quietly lit those with his lighter from out of his pocket. You know, Katsuya, I really tried, Jonouchi whispered. I tried to whip that boy into shape, tried to set him on the right path, but now look, I'm wanted by the police for child abuse, which is bullshit. Jonouchi huddled up next to the grave as he sat with his back to the tombstone. He pulled out a pack of cigarettes and lit one. I honestly wish you never made me his guardian in case of your death. Should have given the boy to his mother, I say. He inhaled the cancer stick, held it in, and then exhaled slowly, and a cloud of disgusting smoke left his mouth. Being a cat and so close to the man, Izuku could smell even more than a normal human, and it made him want to gag. Oh well, if the brat wants to live out of garbage bags then with me, then fine. He's not my problem anymore ... but if I see him again, if we ever cross paths again. A face of rage crossed over Jonouchi's features as he gnashed his teeth together, nearly cutting the cigarette butt in two with his teeth. Well, let's just say you might see him sooner than you think. Izuku's fur bristled at the obvious threat towards Hitoshi as he got on his toes. He resisted the urge to hiss and start swatting at the man. I should have killed him the moment he was in my custody, in all honesty. It was his fault you died. His quirk came in late while you were driving. Jonouchi's face scrunched up as he recalled the memory. It's not fair. The brat threw a tantrum and you paid the price while he didn't even get a scratch on him. Made you wrap your damn car around a pole while under his stupid quirk. Izuku blinked. Hitoshi never told him about that. His quirk came in when he was 6, meaning it was delayed for at least 2 years. It sounds like Hitoshi was in the middle of a temper tantrum of sorts when he must have accidentally put his father under while the man was driving. I highly doubt a 6-year-old would tell their father to crash the car into a pole. No, more than likely, Hitoshi freaked out and didn't understand what was happening and must have kept his father under for too long, causing him to veer off of the road. No wonder he has trauma with his quirk. It goes deeper than it just being villainous in his eyes. Jonouchi sucked on the end of his cigarette once more to try and calm himself down. Yeah, sure, his mother is an addict or whatever, but she would have been a better fit for the brat than he deserved. Izuku narrowed his eyes as he kept his back high in the air. The urge to fight this man was strong, but he held back. He wasn't animal, okay? He still had a conscience and didn't want to fight someone in a graveyard of all places. It was just disrespectful to the dead. Jonouchi snubbed his cigarette out on the ground and quickly got up. I have to go now. My break is almost up and they're expecting me at work. Gotta make that money if I want to keep staying in that crappy motel. See you next week, Katsuya. Izuku was tempted to follow Jonouchi out of the graveyard and bombard him the moment the man stepped out. In fact, he was going to do that if Bakugo hadn't bumped shoulders with the man on his way in. Boy, watch it. Bakugo huffed while he kept walking. Someone ought to teach you some manners, boy. Jonouchi snarled at Bakugo's back and Bakugo looked over his shoulder at the man. Whatever, was all Bakugo had to say before he kept on going. Izuku let Jonouchi go. No, he just had to see what Bakugo was doing here. Izuku followed along the graves, keeping an even greater distance this time as he knew Bakugo was more aware than Jounouchi. Like Jounouchi, Bakugo had a bag on his arm. This one was not from a corner store, but it was a tote bag. When Bakugo stopped a freshly unearthed grave, Izuku knew immediately. Bakugo stared at the grave for a long time before tusking out in annoyance and dropping down. "You're filthy," he grumbled out, and Izuku took a chance. He darted to the other graves, the ones behind Bakugo, to see just what he was talking about. Thankfully, Bakugo was too involved in his tote bag to notice when Izuku changed lanes. He did, however, perk his head up once Izuku crossed, and he looked around quickly before shrugging and going back to his bag. Izuku frowned to himself once he saw what Bakugo was looking at. Izuku's gravestone was vandalized. Someone had spray painted the word useless across the entirety of the stone in bright red spray paint. It honestly hurt Izuku to look at. Bakugo pulled out a spray bottle and a bristle brush. "This is the third time this week I had to clean you up. When are you going to pull your weight, Deku?" Bakugo demanded before spritzing the gravestone down. Whatever was in the bottle immediately started to strip the paint down. Bakugo took the brush and started to scrub the paint. First, it just smeared over his tombstone in a watery red before he pulled back and doused the grave in water. The red spray paint was gone. "There," he whispered. He stored the brush and spray bottle away. "Clean, I'm not your fucking maid, Deku." "Here." Izuku smelt pork and his mouth watered a little when Bakugo placed a bowl of pork katsudon on the grave. Bakugo reached into his tote bag again and pulled out 2 incense sticks, which he placed them in an incense holder. He gave the area a quick look around before lighting the incense with his own palm. A small explosion was made and soon the sticks were lit and the sweet smell of Nag Champa filled the area. Bakugo then sighed softly. He reached up and touched the gravestone gently. "I know that this grave is empty ... but that Deku I saw the USJ wasn't Deku. It wasn't you." He almost seemed to whisper. "I'm more inclined to believe Hitoshi's stupid cat is you than that thing." Izuku ears perked in that. "So, yeah, you're probably rolling in your grave, or in the spirit world about how they defiled your body. I never told Auntie, didn't have the heart to do so, but she along with my parents know that the grave is empty. All she does is cry now. I think she was even fired from her job because she can't go a shift without breaking down. She's lost so much weight. It doesn't help that the heroes are saying your fucking dad is the cause of the empty grave. It's fucked up." Bakugo covered his eyes with his hand. He gritted his teeth and inhaled a sharp breath. "Why'd you do it?" he asked in a pained voice while he started to breathe heavily as he tried to keep his emotions at bay. "I know it wasn't just because of what I said. I know there has to be more. You wouldn't just..." Bakugo turned away from the grave and crossed his arms. If I would have known, that this is where we'd be at in life. That I'd be hearing Auntie sob into her pillow every night when she thinks everyone is sleeping." Bakugo looked up at the sky. It was a beautiful day for such a sad moment. "Why'd I say it?" he whispered lowly. He then turned in a way that he was facing the graves that Izuku was hiding behind, and he sat next to the grave. Bakugo wrapped his arms around his knees. "I guess it's karma coming to bite me in the ass. I know what it feels like now. The others in the class won't even look at me since they learned about what happened. Turns out when you're trying to be a hero, telling someone to kill themselves is looked down upon by other heroes. Now the class hates me, which is fine. I wasn't there to be buddy-buddy with anyone." Bakugo tried to say he wasn't affected by the ostracization he was now facing. It must have been a wake-up call to go from Mr. Popular to the person nobody wants to associate themselves with. "I guess it is kinda crap. The one with the shitty red hair seemed cool. I wanted to see how much I could blast him before his quirk couldn't keep up. But now he won't even look at me. Talk about a wake-up call. They talk behind their hands like I can't hear them." Bakugo gritted his teeth and sucked in a sharp breath as it looked like his demeanor was going to break. It wasn't supposed to be like this. He shook his head and Izuku saw tears. "You weren't supposed to actually go through with it, Deku." His breath shuddered and huddled in himself so far that he was actually on his knees with tears flowing from his eyes and down his hands that were now covering his mouth to keep himself from crying out. I'm sorry, okay?" Bakugo finally cracked as he cried out for anybody to hear him, for someone to maybe come and tell him it was okay. Nobody came. All he was met with was silence. Izuku just stared in amazement. Bakugo sniffled weakly, wiped his tears, and stood up. He let out a shuddered breath and then grabbed his bag. "I'll see you next week," he grumbled. "And you better be clean." Bakugo stopped suddenly and Izuku quickly realized that he had been caught. Bakugo had moved at just the right angle to see Izuku's tail that was sticking out from behind a gravestone. "You," Bakugo whispered and the tote bag was dropped. "What are you?" the blonde demanded, and Izuku's ears went back as he could only stare right back at Bakugo without an answer to give. "How long have you been watching me? And where's your stupid owner?" "Huh." Izuku arched his back when Bakugo approached him and the blonde paused. "I don't care what the others say. What Hitoshi says, you're not a normal cat. I knew at the moment I saw you in Loud Cloud's arms. I knew at the moment you jumped with Mr. Aizawa to fight off those villains. Every time you hiss at Maita for his stupid comments, every time you do something that no normal cat should. What are you? Bakugo demanded almost frantically. Izuku looked at his own grave. He didn't really know why he did this, but he did. Bakugo followed his gaze and Bakugo blanched. His fists then balled up so tightly that his knuckles turned stark white. That's not funny, Bakugo snarled, and his eyes turned aglow with a fury that Izuku had almost never seen before. What sick game do you think you're playing at? Huh, do you just get a rise out watching this sort of thing? Both of his hands started to glow bright orange to show that he was ready to start blasting. Izuku went low to the ground as his fur bristled, his ears went back, and his eyes felt wide. Well, Bakugo must have realized that he was terrifying a cat. Or maybe he realized that he was going to try and blow a cat to smithereens in a cemetery. Either way, he backed off and his hands dimmed until the flame died out. He pointed at Izuku almost aggressively. You stay the fuck away from you freaky fucker. He then snatched his tote bag back up and stormed off. Izuku let out a sigh of relief and looked back at his own grave once he was truly alone. Honestly, he expected that sort of reaction. Still, he walked over to it, the newly disheveled dirt collecting on his paw pads as he padded up to the grave and looked at the Katsuden just sitting there looking pretty. Hey, it was meant for him, right? Nezu looked at Toshinori and Toshinori looked at him. Let's talk about Izuku Midoriya, Nezu demanded. Toshinori scratched at his face. Look, Toshinori sighed heavily. If I would have known that my words would have caused him to kill himself, I would have been less harsh in my wording. He tried to explain to the principal. As the #1 hero in all of Japan, I honestly can say I expected better from you, Toshinori. Any hero with functioning eyes and a brain could have seen that the child was clearly hurting because of his status in life. Nezu started. He clasped his furry paws together. And let's get this out of the way. You were just plain wrong. I don't feel I was, Toshinori challenged while jutting his chin towards the chimera. You can't be a hero without a quirk, and I stand by that decision. I see. I'm going to hand you these student files. You tell me what you see. Nezu immediately pushed 4 student files toward him. Okay, Toshinori, unsure of where this was going, just opened the first file. Hagakure Toru quirk, invisibility. He made sure to enunciate the word quirk to prove his point in this battle. He nodded and grabbed the second one. Ajiru Meshurao, quirk, tail. He put that one down and opened the next one. Itoshi Shinsu, quirk, brainwashing. Finally, the last file, he opened it. Monomanito, quirk, copycat. Okay, what am I looking at? They all have quirks. Yes, they do. But you failed to look. Toshinori. Their quirks are all non-combative. They have to rely on their bodies to defend themselves when the time comes for it. Ajiru has been taking martial arts for 10 years and is a black belt. Hagakure takes taekwondo to help her defense on the off chance she could be caught. Itoshi trains every day in self-defense with his foster parents. And if push comes to shove with Monoma, he knows submission grappling. Every single one of them relies on their quirkless sparring should the worst come. Nezu sternly explained. Think of a quirk like a tool. Is it helpful? Yes, but you should never rely on it. And I am particularly ashamed of you. You should know the pain Izuku Midoriya was going through being quirkless yourself. But I see all the fame has clearly gone to your head. Toshinori frowned as he looked over at each student that was placed in front of him once more. I just didn't want the boy to get hurt and go over his head. He stated softly. He was just a kid, and I figured if I tell him, then he'll look into something less dangerous. Nezu sighed. The sigh sounded like it was from deep within his body. The body of a tired soul. He sipped at the tea in front of him and then placed it back down on the saucer. Aburo and Shouta told me how you handled confronting Mrs. Midoriya. Piled with this, he raised his hand. I believe classes are in order for you. Classes? Yes. You lost your compassion somewhere along the way. So, if you wish to stay employed and I don't ask for an investigation into your heroic deeds in the last few years, then you'll do this. Nezu chirped almost happily. We're going to start with on-site trauma training first. Then we'll move to how to respond to those that have been attacked by villains, which includes an 8-hour video on everything that needs to be done. Like, oh, I don't know, calling an ambulance after a child has been attacked and nearly died from a villain made of sludge. Yeah, then after that, we're going to move on to how to talk to someone who lost a loved one. We're going to dabble into how to prevent suicides and what to do there. And how can I forget, you're going to learn about quirkless discrimination the youth of today face. Nezu clapped his paws happily as Toshinori's jaw dropped. You can't be serious. I am. And if you want to keep working here, you should be too. It was a mistake. A mistake that drove a 13-year-old to suicide. Don't you dare forget that, Toshinori. Nezu warned with a soft hiss nearly leaving his throat. Izuku Midoriya was 13. Toshinori's face crumbled at that. Your words drove him over the ledge. Without a doubt in my mind, if you, and someone else who will not be named in this conversation, wouldn't have been so heartless that day, that boy would still be alive. I don't want to come off as crass. Toshinori kept his tone steady. But why do you care? He finally came out and said it. You didn't know him. I hardly knew him. I care because that boy's body was up and walking around the USJ announcing to everyone your wrongdoings. I care because Shouta was there the day he jumped and has been wrecked over the fact that he wasn't fast enough to stop his death. I care because he was child. I care because Nana would care. Yeah, that hit Toshinori where it hurt, Nedzu could tell. Toshinori's eyes went wide and his face blanched because he knew Nedzu was right. I care for the same reason you should. You're a hero and you should care more about this. The fame has gone to your head, Toshinori. It's best you take a step back and really think about what you did that day. Truthfully, I don't like the man you've become and neither would Nana. There was a pregnant pause as the two of them stared at one another. Finally, Toshinori sighed. When do these classes start? Tomorrow. They'll take about a week to complete. There will be tests, and don't worry about your own lessons. Loud Cloud has more than happily agreed to teach the kids while you're away. Toshinori nodded. Okay, he whispered, and Defeat 2 really didn't think he would jump. I want you to know that. It doesn't matter if you thought he would or wouldn't. What matters is that he did. Words are just as powerful as actions, Toshinori. Be better. For him. They had 2 weeks until the sports festival, and in those 2 weeks, it was work, work, work. They had to train to be their absolute best and be on their toes for whatever the sports festival may bring at them, as they didn't know what was going to happen. Today was no different. It was a foundational hero studies day, and Class 1 was surprised to see Oboro, or rather Loud Cloud, number 8, instead of All Might when they came out on the field all in their gym uniforms. Loud Cloud. Several students shouted in glee and some even clapped upon seeing him out on the field with them. All Might is going to be out the rest of the week. Oboro pointed at himself with his thumb. But fear not. I know exactly what I'm doing. He grinned at all of them. I hope you all are ready for what I have prepared. The man continued to smile a bright smile. Now, you guys have already done battle trials. Yes, a little too soon in my opinion, but no matter. Today we're going to touch upon some quirkless sparring. Hitoshi flinched a little when some classmates let out groans of annoyance. Oboro gave a weak chuckle at this. While yes, a little dull compared to battle trails, it is nonetheless an important aspect. You never know what could happen. You could run into someone with a quirk that turns yours off like Shouta, or you could be injured in a way that will make you unable to use your quirk. So, quirkless sparring. But I went ahead and made it just a little more bearable. Ah, here they come now. Oboro was looking behind them and they all quickly turned to follow their gaze. 1B was coming up to them, also dressed in their gym uniforms. Flat agreed that his class needed some help in this aspect as well, so it was decided that you guys can spar amongst one another. There are 20 of you and 20 of them. Oboro crossed his arms and gave a smile. Hello, 1B. He waved the children over. A couple of the more excitable ones rushed right over while others took their sweet time. The moment Monoma was within arm's reach of Hitoshi, he came up from behind, wrapped his arms around his friend, and placed his head on his shoulder as he couldn't place his head on top of Hitoshi's hair. You rat bastard, you got taller, Monoma hissed. It's true, Hitoshi finally reached his growth spurt over the weekend and had at least gained an inch, making him now taller than most, not all, of his classmates. Shoji was still the tallest in class. However, Hitoshi considered it a win that he and Shouta were now at the exact same height. Monoma gave a grumble as he just continued to hold to Hitoshi as Oboro started to speak again. Now, Oboro clapped his hands together. During this quirkless sparring, your goal is to get your opponent pinned and on the ground for a grand total of 10. Oboro held up all 10 of his fingers. Seconds. This doesn't seem like a long time, but trust me, it is when you're desperately trying to pin someone to the ground. However, I made it fun. What we're doing here is a tournament of sorts. The top dog, if you will. We're going to pair you all off with the opposite class and we're going to pair you off from there. The person remaining wins. Oboro winked. It'll at least make quirkless sparring a little better for you all. And Oboro gave a smile that was not one of reassurance. You don't have to worry about your partners because I already picked them for you. Boom. A hologram suddenly appeared showing the first round and who they were paired with. Your height and weight have all been put into consideration, Oboro announced almost proudly as they all stared at the hologram. Ida versus Honuki. Tetsutasu versus Kirishima. Achako versus Takage. Kaminari versus Monoma. Itoshi versus Kiwaro. Shoji versus Bondo. Todoroki versus Shota. Winda versus Kanoko. Arazu versus Rin. Bakugo versus Kamakiri. Takoyami versus Koda. Siro versus Awase. Jiro versus Kendo. Sato versus Shishida. Koda versus Kaibara. Ajiro versus Rin. Tsuyu versus Tsubuarba. Aoyama versus Shozaki. Hagakure versus Fukudashi. There were some mumbles as they all looked at their opponents. Hitoshi looked at Kiwaro and Kiwaro looked at him before giving him a nod and he returned it. Monoma finally stopped being Hitoshi's backpack long enough for him to look at Kaminari. That's my opponent. Monoma almost seemed to laugh. He looks like an idiot. Hitoshi gave a weak chuckle. I can't say I've known him long enough to dispute that. He usually stays out of my way. Hitoshi explained. Monoma huffed and rewrapped his arms around Hitoshi. Where's Moss? Monoma finally caught on that Hitoshi's beloved cat wasn't with him. Oh, he'll show up later, he's chatting with Nedzu. Ah, very well. If Hitoshi had ears like Moss, he was sure they would have perked when he heard Minta's gross comment. Oh boy, my opponent is a chick. Shame, the girls in 1B aren't nearly as hot as the Wanna girls. And it seems like I got the fat one too. He mumbled the last part to Kaminari, who gave his head a shake. She's not fat, and even if she was, you shouldn't be saying things like that. Hitoshi heard Kaminari lightly scold Minta. God, I can't wait to be rid of him. Hitoshi growled and patted Monoma's hands. I can't imagine. He sounds like a nightmare. Monoma grumbled against Hitoshi's shoulder. Are you comfortable? Hitoshi finally asked his friend. It was so strange seeing Monoma be so touchy-feely. Monoma grumbled sleepily. Mom took away my coffee as punishment for failing an English test. I need caffeine. He whined. Oof. Hitoshi bit back his laughter and just patted Monoma's hands once again. I'm sorry about that, buddy. Have you considered asking Yaoyorozu? She has a coffee maker on her. No, but she can make food. I've seen her do this with Moss many times. She's made him canned cat food all the time. Maybe she can make you a cup of coffee. Then, just like that, his human backpack was removed. Ms. Yaoyorozu, do you have a moment? He heard Monoma call out to her. Hitoshi smiled at the interaction as Monoma and Yaoyorozu spoke briefly. Yaoyorozu opened her palm and boom, canned coffee in an instant from her elbow. Monoma bowed profusely at the gift. You're a goddess, he cried to her in joy. He then took the drink and basically downed it in a single gulp. Hitoshi smiled and put his hands in his pockets. Okay, Aburo caught everyone's attention. Now that you all know who you're fighting, let's go ahead and get some rules out of the way. This is 100% quirkless sparring. No quirks allowed. I'm aware that some of you have quirks that are 5-finger contact. For people with those quirks, we have some half gloves for you. Please come up and take a pair. A couple of students, Ochako being one of them, came up and grabbed the half gloves. As this was going on, Aburo continued. Some ground rules. This is sparring, not fighting. There will be no hair pulling, no eye poking, and absolutely nothing below the belt. If any of you break these rules, it's automatic detention with Mr. Aizawa. And let me tell you, you do not want one of his detentions. Am I clear? He spoke a little more sternly as he looked at everyone. Yes, sensei. Everyone shouted and Aburo nodded. Good. I'll be the referee for all of this and we'll go up one pairing at a time. Starting with the pairing. Ida and Honuki, you're up. And Aburo put a standard gym whistle in his mouth and blew. Thank you for telling me this, Izuku. I guess it does bring to life some things. Nedzu hummed after Izuku finished telling him all he saw in the cemetery. It's also telling me that we need to make sure Hitoshi is completely protected from his uncle. I'll look into sending a few cops to the nearby motels around the dance studio. Hopefully, we'll catch him. Nedzu typed away on his computer. Oop, 1 second there, Izuku. Nedzu pressed on the intercom and spoke to a classroom. Please put your phone away, Yagi, and focus on your work. Don't make me take it from you. There was a gagging nose, no doubt from Toshinori choking on his own blood, and it was quickly followed up by an indignant I'm nearly 50, and I'll still take your phone away. Put it up. Then Nedzu hung up the intercom. He focused on Izuku immediately after that. It's a good thing that young Bakugo is starting to show a little more remorse for his actions. I just find it odd that he's holding it all in. Nedzu sipped his tea. Izuku had his own decaffeinated tea and dipped his paw in to lick a fat droplet off of the end. I don't. Kaken has always been emotionally constipated. The only emotion he's ever allowed himself to be seen in is anger. Why? I don't know. Well, hopefully, anger management should help him and show him that actual emotions aren't a bad thing. Nedzu put his tea down and started to type away at his computer. Still, now that young Bakugo and all might have been properly dealt with and are now going to rectify their horrid behaviors, it's time for me to move on to the big one. Aldera. Oh right, I almost forgot you put them under investigation. Yep, Shouta and Kan are both there as we speak. That's why both of their classes are with Aburo today. And guess what? Nedzu suddenly reached out and patted Izuku's head suddenly. What? Aldera has no idea the storm that's coming their way. It's a complete and utter surprise to them that 2 heroes from UA are coming to their school. Both Kan and Shouta are prepared, of course. Oh, the security footage is going to be so fun to look at. Nedzu was positively happy as his whiskers twitched and so did his ears. What's going to happen to Aldera? A fine. A fine at worst, but I'm not aiming for a fine. Nedzu stated and pushed away from his desk and stood up. Then he started to pace. Izuku turned himself into a loaf by tucking his paws under him. He knew it was going to be a long one. No, you see, no competent middle school should allow quirk usage so frivolously. I understand that accidents happen. However, I talked to every parent with a quirkless child in Aldera, and each and every one of them had made complaints against the school to no avail. Their children often came home beaten and quirk usage had been clear. Some parents even noticed the exact same situation with their children's grades as you have told me. that their child should be getting higher grades, but each grade was docked down to at least C. It doesn't just end there either. You see, young Izuku, I took it a step forward. Aldera is actually over capacity on the number of students they have. Their teachers have more students than they should. Yet, upon looking for myself, their doors aren't closed. They're still allowing students in. So, I did what any good principal would do. I hacked into their records, and you wouldn't believe what I found. What? Izuku hung on Nezu's every word, desperately wanting the tea more than anything right now. I have good reason to believe that Aldera Middle School is either money laundering, hence their need for more children, or they're lying on their records about the number of children they're accepting, which is also very illegal. Either way, I'm willing to bet this school isn't just getting fined. They're shutting down. Izuku's jaw dropped. Seriously? Yep, Aldera getting shut down. Izuku felt his shoulder relax a little as he then stared at the desk. I never thought I'd see it for myself. Well, it's thanks to you that their misdeeds are coming to life. Nezu reached and touched Izuku's head once again. I never would have known otherwise. What's going to happen to it? I'm glad you asked. Nezu was grinning as he rushed back to his seat like a happy kid. I already got plans in the works, as I'm always prepared and always wanted to do this. Moss, I present to you UAS very first public middle school. He then turned the monitor towards Izuku and his ears perked as he looked at the model of a building. All staff will be hand-picked by myself, naturally. And not only that, but I'm enforcing a strict quirk usage policy, as well as a policy on bullying. Obviously, because it's a middle school, there won't be any heroic training, but there will be studies and even extracurriculars, like a self-defense training program for those that wish to be heroes in the future. Oh, and before you ask, of course, I'm going to accept quirkless students. In fact, I was thinking of adding a program. If you'd let me. Izuku tilted his head. A program? What kind, and why should my opinion matter? Well, the very tips of Nezu's ears turned red as he scratched his neck almost nervously. It's a program for the quirkless. You see, it's a program to encourage them and help raise their self-confidence in these trying times of their lives. It's going to be there specifically to help them find a future career, get therapy, or even as just a small little safe haven for those going through a hard time. Wow, I'd give my left leg for a program like that. Izuku whispered. It sounds amazing, Nezu. What's it going to be called? This is why I need your permission. The Izuku program was the name I was thinking of. Izuku stopped, his eyes going wide. What? He whispered because he wasn't sure he heard the principal quite right. The Izuku program, to honor your memory of when you were alive, so you can keep helping quirkless children like you once were, even in death. It's like I said. This is all because of you, because you brought so much to my eyes. It's only fitting that you get this named after you. Izuku got up from his loaf position, and because Nezu was just right there, he was able to reach up and put his paws on the chimera's shoulders. This allowed Nezu to hold him in a hug. Oh, Nezu gasped a little as he wasn't expecting this. I love it. Then came the tears. Thank you, he whispered while sobbing. Thank you, was all he could say over and over again. Nezu relaxed in the hug and patted Izuku's back. I couldn't have done it without you, Izuku. Izuku came trotting out to the field. Oboro was the first thing he saw, so Oboro was the person he literally climbed up. Whoa, Oboro gasped and instantly jerked towards as Izuku's claws sunk into clothing and skin while the cat clambered up his back. Izuku climbed the man all the way to his shoulder. Once perched, the man looked at him. You couldn't have just rubbed against me, he asked. Nah, Izuku responded. Climbing is faster, he said, despite the fact that the teacher couldn't understand. Oboro broke away from Izuku and his face suddenly turned angry. His eyebrows turned downwards and scowl twisted his lips. Then he blew the whistle around his neck and the loud trill made Izuku flinch at the noise. Minta, that is absolutely not allowed. He all but snapped in a tone that made everyone look at him in alarm. Hitoshi, who was standing off to the side with Monoma, stiffened considerably at Oboro's less than pleasant tone. To be fair, at hearing Oboro angry made Izuku's ears go back in alarm. Then he turned to see just what made Oboro of all people angry. It looked like Minta was sparring with a girl, only Minta had taken his hand and shoved it right up her shirt to cop a feel while he was trying to get out from under her. The girl slapped him so suddenly, making his head whip to the side. She jumped back and let out a whine of disgust. Tears formed in her eyes at the clear assault. Hiruaro immediately rushed to the girl's aid along with a couple of 1A's girls as well. Of course, if anybody knew of Minta's perviness, it was them. I was just trying to push her off, honest. Minta tried to plead his case, but Oboro wasn't having it. No, out. You lost by default and you can expect detention for this. Oboro snapped at the teen while pointing away from everyone else. Minta mumbled something that did not evade Izuku's sharp ears. Sure, but when Hitoshi wants to be a perv. Izuku hissed at the teen for his comment. Hitoshi is nothing like you. Izuku snarled and jumped from Oboro's shoulder. The man was fast and grabbed Izuku's vest before he could charge. Apparently, his ears were in airplane mode, as Shoto likes to dub it whenever Izuku's gets combative. Easy there, Spicy. Why don't you go and help the girl? Oboro encouraged. Leave Minta to me. I'm the teacher. Izuku's ears went back a little before he just agreed and let Oboro take care of it. Izuku was placed on the ground and he trotted off toward the girl. He then heard Oboro shout, Minta, I want to talk to you in private for a moment. I need you to repeat to me what you just said. I know I shouldn't cry, Izuku heard the girl say as he approached her. No, it's okay, Kinoko. When he groped me the first time I teared up. He heard Mina whisper to the girl. Kinoko sniffled weakly. Why hasn't he been expelled yet? He does it when the teachers aren't looking, Ochako told her while she patted the girl's shoulder comfortingly. That and I think his parents are part of the Hero Commission. Ochako spotted Moss and then looked at Kinoko. Hey, it looks like you have a visitor. She pointed over and Izuku came trotting up to the girl. He was careful when he rubbed against her legs so as to not spook her. Oh, he's adorable, Kinoko whispered. Is he yours? Oh no, he's mine. Hitoshi spoke up with a hand raised, but he didn't get too close. It's cool, he's not on duty if you want to pet him or even hold him. Kinoko wiped her tears and bent down to pick Izuku up. Once he was in her arms, she tilted him and held him like a baby. A popular way people like to hold cats, he was noticing. Still, Izuku purred at this and it made Kinoko smile a watery smile. He does everything he can to get close to girls. He dresses like them and he even does ballet. He's clearly a perv, and I bet he doesn't even have an allergy. I think he's just using that cat to get closer to the girls. Look, Izuku heard Minta yell. Stop bringing Hitoshi up. This has nothing to do with him. Oboro scolded the boy. Izuku shook his head before going back to making Kinoko smile. He had to be a little extra cat-like as he moved, sat up, and started to play with her bangs, which did make her smile a little more. Oh, he's precious, she whispered, like you wouldn't believe. Suyu smiled and scratched Moss under the chin. He's our vice representative, you know. A perfect little vice representative. A gentleman. Mina cooed. Izuku was sure Ada, who was just standing a little ways away, was fuming a little. Losing a cat must have been a blow to the poor guy's ego. Bakugo let out a snort. That guy is really reaching, isn't he? He tried to ask Todoroki, to which he got the retort of I don't talk to abusers. Todoroki practically snarled while looking away from Bakugo. To now go. Hearing Oboro's final shout made Izuku look over to see the man pointing off toward the track. 50 laps. And you can bet Shadow will hear about this, so don't get comfortable. Minta sneered before jogging off towards the tracks, where he would start running. Oboro turned back around and came walking forward where his demeanor would change. Okay. He clapped his hands. Who's next? I believe it's Yaoyorozu versus Rin. He asked in his usual chipper tone. Izuku would eventually be let go by Kinoko, and he would join Hitoshi's side and eventually up and on Hitoshi's shoulder. That was when he noticed the two boys clearly wrestling off just a little ways away. He tapped Hitoshi's face to get his owner's attention. Hitoshi asked. Izuku used his paw to point to the two boys that were constantly trying to get on top of one another. It was just a mass of flying limbs as they struggled and refused to give up. He saw red and realized that one of them was Kirishima. Oh, that. Yeah, they were second up. They've been at it for over 15 minutes now. They just won't go down, so we had to move on. Oboro is hoping that by the time class ends one of them will wear out. It didn't seem like any time soon. Lunch came by and Hitoshi was a little more than surprised when Todoroki came up, dropped his tray at their table, and sat. Hello. Hitoshi smiled at Todoroki. How are you today? He asked. Todoroki swallowed hard and placed his hands in front of him. He started to wring his fingers together before sighing. I would like to befriend you, Todoroki suddenly said, and Hitoshi, along with everyone else at their table, minus Yaoyorozu, rose their eyebrows or even blinked in surprise. Todoroki has always been a bit of a recluse. I understand that this is sudden, but I have my own personal reasons for doing so. I learned things about you from the USJ, and I feel that maybe it may be beneficial if we were to be friends, Todoroki almost whispered before turning away from Hitoshi. Hitoshi immediately turned to Yaoyorozu, and Yaoyorozu simply nodded her head at him, almost like telling Hitoshi that Todoroki's intentions are pure. Okay, Hitoshi said with a bit of a smile. Welcome to the table. He smiled. Takoyami came up to the table and sat beside Hitoshi. Hitoshi looked at him and smiled. What do you have today? Hitoshi asked. Simple red beans and rice. You. Homemade bento. Dad and Uri made some onigiri for me today. Spicy tuna. Todoroki opened his food and Moss, who was sitting on Hitoshi's lap, flicked his ears before giving a hiss. Immediately the dual-haired boy jumped. Have I done something? He asked in alarm. What's in your food? Hitoshi asked and took a bite of his onigiri. Some fried rice and miso soup with scallops. It's the scallops. You see, Moss has gotten into the habit of warning me if others have shellfish on their plates. He's not mad, just giving me a warning. Also good boy. Hitoshi took some of his tuna out of his onigiri and handed it to Moss. Oh, I see, so he can smell shellfish really well. Yep, he's good at that. Todoroki smiled and looked like he was going to reach to pet, but paused and drew back. He's on duty. He had to remind himself. He then grabbed his spoon and started to quietly eat. "Can Moss have a scallop?" he asked, making Hitoshi look at him. Hitoshi looked at Moss and Moss looked at him. Moss was looking at him almost like he was saying, "It's up to you. I'd rather him not. It's just on the off chance of if I touch him and then touch my mouth it could transfer. It's that bad. He'd have to have a bath in order for me to safely touch him again." Fair enough. They ate their lunch, everyone making small conversation with one another. "Monoma, are you aiming to get into Wanna during the sports festival?" Takoyami asked. Monoma smiled. "Of course. 1B just can't handle me, and let me tell you, I deserve to be in Wanna more than some people." Monoma looked over at Mineta, who was sitting off with Kaminari. Though, if Hitoshi was looking right, Kaminari was more interested in talking to Mina and Siro the next table over than with Mineta. But we'll see. When lunch was starting to end, with 5 minutes left, Hitoshi got up to go to the bathroom. "Here, Moss." He put his cat on the table. "I'll be back in just a minute. No need to follow." Ventas begged the question. "How does Moss go to the bathroom? There's no litter boxes around." Todoroki asked. Hitoshi paused and smiled a little. "He just uses the toilet." Todoroki's eyes went wide. "He does. Yeah, he can flush it as well. He's that smart." Hitoshi patted Moss's head before walking off. Something that wasn't mentioned, because it didn't initially matter, but today for Hitoshi was a skirt day. He felt pretty and wanted to show it. It's an important thing to know now. Hitoshi went to the bathroom, not really paying much attention when he heard someone else follow behind. He did his business and walked over to the sinks to wash his hands. That was when little hands grasped the sides of his skirt and yanked down hard. Hard enough for Hitoshi to suddenly feel cold air where he shouldn't. It took a whole second, which felt like a lifetime for Hitoshi to realize just what happened. Still, it took him a whole other second as he just stared down at his skirt that was around his ankles. Maybe a part of him should be happy that this happened in the privacy of the bathroom ... but he wasn't. He'd rather this happen in the lunchroom. Not when he was alone. Boxers, not what I expected," Mineta commented. "I guess you are a guy after all. I mean, your voice gave it away, but you never know with quirks these days." Mineta shrugged. Then Hitoshi snapped out of it when Mineta came into his field of view. Something overcame Hitoshi. Something deep and dark brewing from the depths of his soul. His fist clenched tightly. Then, Hitoshi cocked his arm back and swung. Izuku felt his ear twitch at a noise. It was so muffled from all the others talking, but he could have sworn. There was a scream, and next thing Izuku saw was Mineta being thrown out of the restroom only for Hitoshi to come flying after him. Hitoshi grabbed Mineta by his collar and then punched Mineta straight across the face with an enraged curse of "motherfucker," leaving his mouth. Izuku was rushing towards Hitoshi, same as all of his friends. "Stop it," Yaoyorozu demanded as she grabbed Hitoshi's wrist to get him to let go of Mineta. "Hitoshi, release him." Monoma reached under Hitoshi's arms and used his own body weight to try and yank him away. Izuku had to wedge himself in between the two by sitting directly on Mineta's chest and using some of his own weight to push Hitoshi back. It was Dark Shadow who was the one to succeed in fully separating them. The quirk used a good amount of strength to push Hitoshi back and away from Mineta. Hitoshi fell back in alarm and immediately he started to scramble towards Mineta. It took Monoma, Yaoyorozu, and Takoyami all to hold Hitoshi back. "What on earth is going on?" Hazashi demanded as he came rushing towards the commotion. "He attacked me out of the blue," Mineta cried while holding onto his obviously broken nose. "Fuck you," Hitoshi roared back while still struggling against his friends. "Loud Cloud, we're going to need some help." Hazashi mumbled into his phone before addressed the two students. "Hitoshi, you need to calm down." It was a type of anger and tone that neither Izuku nor Hazashi has seen from the boy, as both were clearly taken aback when Hitoshi practically screamed, "I am calm." No, you're not. You call this calm?" Hazashi gestured towards the boy. He then reached over and grabbed Hitoshi's chin in his hand. "You need to calm down. Breathe," he instructed. He then demonstrated by breathing in slowly, holding it, and then exhaling. Izuku jumped onto Hitoshi's shoulder and started to loudly purr to help get him to calm down. Hitoshi's breath was shaking, yet he still started to mimic Hazashi's breathing. It started to work, and soon Hitoshi relaxed enough for the others to let him go, knowing he wasn't going to attack Mineta like a wild animal. Aburo came into the cafeteria moments later, and both Mineta and Hitoshi were separated. Hazashi took Hitoshi while Aburo took Mineta. Izuku noticed that Hitoshi was looking at his knuckles with wide eyes. The knuckles on his right hand were split and bleeding. "I didn't mean to go crazy," he whispered. I was just so angry." "Start by telling me what happened," Hazashi urged. "I went to the bathroom. I guess he must have followed me, then the next thing I know he had pulled my skirt down. I lost it," Hitoshi whispered while looking at his shaking hands. "I never." He put his hand over his mouth. "Damn," Hazashi grumbled and chewed on his thumb in thought. It had to be in the bathroom. The little creep sure knows how to play his cards. Well, it turns out not everything was going to work in Mineta's favor today. Kaminari came up and tapped Hazashi on the shoulder. "Sir." "Yes?" Hazashi asked. Kaminari's mouth twisted a bit before he sighed. Would it help if I said Mineta told me he was going to pull down Hitoshi's skirt to finally see for himself if Hitoshi was a boy or girl? Kaminari inquired. Because ... he did tell me. I didn't think he was serious until well. Kaminari started to chew and gnaw on his nails. Are you willing to tell Nezu this? Will it get Mineta out of our class? Because I'm getting sick of him. It will. It might not get him expelled, but it will absolutely get him kicked out of the hero course, as this is his third strike for sexual harassment. Why we allow 3 strikes is beyond me. Azashi shook his head. Please, just get this creep out of our class. Kaminari almost seemed to beg. By the end of the school day, Mineta was expelled from just the hero course by Mr. Aizawa. However, because of his status with his parents, he was still allowed in Gen Ed while his parents fought against the claim. At least he was finally out of 1A. Hitoshi didn't go unpunished either. I'm sorry to have to do this, Hitoshi, but you will be serving after-school detention. I can't just let you get away with what you did, Nezu explained. Even if it were to be justified, there were still no cameras in the restroom and therefore no witnesses. Hitoshi bowed to Nezu. I fully accept that what I did was wrong. I know I never should have lost my temper like that, he told the principal softly. Good. Hitoshi looked at his scabbed knuckles again before sighing heavily. It seemed he had a lot to think about. Izuku watched this and nudged against his friend's face softly, trying to tell Hitoshi that it was going to be okay. Hitoshi would then exit Nezu's office, and he was surprised when he saw Todoroki sitting outside like he was waiting for him. They locked eye and Todoroki stood. I wanted to talk with you. Oh, sorry you had to see that earlier. I hope that didn't put a damper on you wanting to befriend me. Hitoshi rubbed the back of his neck. No, it just sort of solidifies it for me. It's almost as I feared. Hitoshi and Moss both tilted their heads almost the exact same way as they looked at Todoroki. The thing is, Hitoshi, I'm almost ashamed I didn't see it before, Todoroki said, and the two of them started to walk. See what? That you grew up like me. Isn't your dad number 2? Hitoshi almost wanted to scoff. Yes, but that doesn't mean he wasn't abusive. Hitoshi stopped walking for just a moment and looked at Todoroki. He truly looked at the recluse of 1A. Todoroki looked back at him and Hitoshi frowned. How ... did you know I was abused? Certain things only prove it. However, it was the USJ that told me everything. That boy mentioned your uncle beating you. Granted, he was a villain, but you expression told me it was true. Shoto scratched his hair. I know it's none of my business, however, for a moment, when I saw you fighting Mineta, I saw myself, a boy that just finally had enough of the shit that life threw at him. Todoroki continued to twist and wring his fingers to the point that it almost looked painful. I don't know. It's up to you. But I figured, maybe we could even help each other. Then, just like that, Todoroki zoomed away from Hitoshi in a hurry. Huh, Hitoshi whispered while watching the boy run off. He then looked at Moss. What do you think? Moss simply shrugged his shoulders. Yeah, I'm with you on that. I guess it wouldn't hurt to have another friend, especially one that knows what I go through. Bonus. Dabai chewed on the end of his cigarette as he walked through the alley. This better be worth my damn time, he muttered. Jin was a weird one. Yeah, his heart was in the right place for most things. Most, not all, and the guy had a serious case of dual personality disorder, but this was just weird. The man had personally called Dabai. This way, move your ass, please. I didn't know what to do, or who to go to. He heard Jin call to him down the alleyway in different voices. If it were anybody else, Dabai would maybe fear this to be an ambush of sorts, but he's known Jin long enough to know that the man was mostly harmless. So, Dabai just followed along at a brisk pace while enjoying his smoke. Yeah, Dabai grumbled and shoved his hands in his pockets. He turned the corner of the alleyway and looked at the sight before him. There Jin was, living out of an abandoned building. He watched as the man walked through the dilapidated building with relative ease as if he were familiar with it. It looked to be an apartment complex that was now owned by the rats. All the windows were smashed in and the doorway was just a top half of a door. Dabai hummed, ducked under the top half of the door, and walked into the darkened building. Jin had a candle on the table that was the sole light source. The man grabbed the candle in a hurry and urged Dabai to follow with a hand wave. What is this about? He asked Jin. I just found her. We did not touch her. She was unconscious. She's been this way for days now. If she weren't breathing, I would have thought she was dead. Twice yelled and Dabai felt a headache starting to form. Slow down. Who is her? He tried to request, but Jin just kept ushering him deeper into the apartment complex with the candle. They walked down into a tiny bedroom with a single dirty mattress. There laid a familiar face, for Dabai at least. Toga, he whispered in surprise. He traveled with her for a while, but before too long she stopped showing up. Dabai figured she just got sick of him, like everybody else, and left his sorry ass. But now, here she was. Her hair was down, out of her twin buns. And her clothes weren't the same clothes she last wore. She wore a school uniform, as that's what her parents kicked her out in. But now she was wearing a very loose-fitting white tank top and simple blue boxer shorts. Her eyes were open and she was just staring blankly at the ceiling. Jin was right, she did look dead, but she was clearly breathing. She was naked when I found her. She just laying face first on the ground. I really did think she was dead. Jin spoke clearly for once as his other selves kept quiet. She was naked. Dab, I did not like that. Yeah, like I said, I did not touch her. I simply clothed her, and she's been like this for days. I'm worried we should take her to the hospital. Fuck hospitals. Dab, I rubbed at the area around his mouth, mindful of his stitches. He almost wanted to agree with Jin. Fuck hospitals. But if she's been like this for days and she was found naked in the alleyway, then a hospital might be what they need. Do you have any idea who could have done this to her? Not a clue. But they will feel my wrath when I get my hands on them. Oh wait, I might know. No, I don't. Why did I say that? Dab, I sighed. Jin, yes, call an ambulance. I think that's about the best thing we can do for her right now. You got it, man. Fuck hospitals. It's for Toga. My point still stands. In the end, Dabai was the one who called the ambulance. He didn't like the idea of sending her to one, but he knew she was better off. Still, that didn't mean he wasn't going to watch and wait from afar. Someone had hurt her, and they were going to pay. A second bonus. Iri came up to Hitoshi and placed her arms on his lap with a bit of a pout. Hey there. Hitoshi put his book away and patted her hair. Is everything okay? No, Iri mumbled with wet eyes. Oh no. He tucked some of her hair behind her ear. What's the matter? Iri's eyes continued to water. I hate ballet. She whined while holding on to Hitoshi. I'm sorry, big brother. I hate it. I hate it so much. My feet hurt and my classmates are mean and I didn't want you to be upset because I don't want to do it anymore. She started to breathe in and out heavily as she was on the verge of crying. Hey. Hitoshi picked Iri up and placed her in his lap. Now, why would I be upset? He asked her. Iri sniffled and sloppily wiped her eyes. Because you love ballet. And you're my big brother and so I should love ballet, but it's awful. I don't want to go to another class. Hitoshi smiled at her and tried to hold in his laughter. He had to exhale slowly to compose himself. That's okay, he reassured her. Just because I'm your big brother doesn't mean we have to love the exact same things. If you don't like ballet, that's perfectly fine. It is. She whined and he nodded. It is, he told her firmly. Have you considered something else instead? Iri perked up a little more at this and she nodded. I don't like dance, however, I want to try the game. The game with all the other little girls where they hit a ball with a stick. Softball? No, the other one. Baseball? He asked, almost impressed. She nodded firmly. It looks so fun. And all the other girls that play it are much nicer than the ballet girls. The ballet girls are mean, she reiterated with a pout. So, I asked Dad if I could try that out instead. We're going to start classes next week and I don't have to do ballet anymore. I just wanted to tell you because I thought you'd be angry. Of course I wouldn't be angry. You're trying to find what you're good at and what you like and I can't be angry at you for that. He patted her hair. Iri snuggled up to him. Well, I'm glad. I'm really glad. That's right. It's a third bonus. Subways in Japan go about 320 kilometers per hour, which is more than fast enough to do the job. A train whizzed on by and it created a breeze that most would cause unpleasant as it tickled at their skin and at the base of their necks. If you got too close it could be deadly. Hood up, hands in pockets, they only watched as the fifth train passed them that day. They haven't moved from their spot at all today. Never even boarded a single train. Their legs shook. It's going to hurt, they told themselves. That's what was stopping them. That fear of pain. With a sniffle, they wiped their tears and turned their back away from the trains and out of the subway entirely. I'll try again tomorrow when I'm brave enough, they thought while wiping their tears away again as they stepped out into the day. Tomorrow for sure.